violets were always fresh. My name is Al, and I've been a groundskeeper at Meadowbrook Cemetery for 23 years. I know every stone, every plot, every corner of these 140 acres, like I know the lines on my own hands. I've seen grief in all its forms, the fresh kind that bends people double, and the old kind that settles into weekly visits with lawn chairs and one sided conversations. I've learned to read the language of flowers left at graves, the rotation of seasons marked by what blooms people bring. But I'd never seen anything like what started happening at Row 9C. The section had been forgotten for decades. We called it the Lost Garden, though that wasn't its official name. It sat in the northeast corner, past where most families ventured, overgrown with wild roses and blackberry brambles that had reclaimed the narrow pathways between plots. The stones dated back to the 1940s and 50s, most so weathered you couldn't read the names anymore. Cemetery administration had been talking about restoration for years, but it was always next season, next budget, next director. Last April, I finally got approval to start clearing it out. The work was slow, cutting back decades of growth without disturbing the graves themselves. I worked alone most days, preferring the quiet rhythm of pruning shears and the smell of cut grass to having a crew disturbing the stillness. That's how I found her marker on the third day. It was smaller than the others, barely 2 feet tall, made of white marble that had somehow stayed cleaner than the surrounding stones. The engraving was still sharp. Emily Rose Chambers, born March 15th, 1947, died August 2nd, 1953, forever in bloom. Below that, in smaller script, Our Violet. What caught my attention wasn't the stone itself, but what lay in front of it. A small bunch of African violets, deep purple, tied with a white ribbon. They looked like they'd been placed that morning, petals still firm, no wilting, water droplets still clinging to the leaves. I picked them up, expecting to find a small vase or water source hidden in the grass. Nothing. Just the flowers lying directly on the ground, fresh as if they'd been cut minutes before. I figured it was a family member who'd found the grave before I started clearing. People do that sometimes. They remember a plot location, come back after years away. I took the flowers with me, placed them in water back at the maintenance shed, thinking whoever left them might come back looking. The next morning, there was another bunch in the exact same spot. Same deep purple violets, same white ribbon, same impossible freshness. I checked my security logs. I was the only one who'd signed in to that section. Our main gate has cameras, and I pulled the footage from the previous evening through dawn. No one entered, no cars in the lot except mine when I arrived at 6:30 a.m. I started documenting it. Every morning for a week, fresh violets. Always in the house. Same arrangement. Always that same white ribbon tied in a simple bow. I stopped taking them, just left them where they lay, watching them wilt naturally over the course of the day. By evening, they'd be brown and curled. By the next morning, there'd be a fresh bunch and the old ones would be gone. Not just wilted, gone completely, like someone had cleaned up after themselves. I brought it up with Sandra, our cemetery director. She gave me that look people give when they think you're working too much alone. Maybe it's family, she said. Maybe they're coming early before you get there. At 4 a.m., I showed her the timestamp on the footage. Gate doesn't open until 6. I'm here by 6:30. She didn't have an answer for that. Told me to keep an eye on it. Let her know if I saw anyone. But she was curious enough that she pulled the burial records for Emily Rose Chambers. The file was thin. Most records from that era were. Death certificate showed she'd died of pneumonia. Parents were listed as Robert and Helen Chambers. There was an obituary clipping, yellowed and fragile, tucked into the folder. I read it 3 times. Emily Rose Chambers, age 6, passed peacefully on August 2nd, 1953, after a brief illness. She is survived by her parents, Robert and Helen Chambers, and her grandmother, Margaret Rose. Emily loved flowers, especially violets, which her mother grew in their garden. In lieu of flowers, the family requests donations to the children's wing of St. Mary's Hospital. Helen Chambers stated, "I will bring Emily violets until the end of time, because that's what mothers do. They keep promises." I felt something cold settle in my stomach reading those words. Until the end of time. I started arriving earlier, 5 a.m., sitting in my truck near the gate, watching the path to row 9C through binoculars. Nothing moved in that darkness, no car lights, no flashlights, no figures walking between the stones. At 6, I'd walk the section myself, and there they'd be, fresh violets, perfect and impossible. Sandra installed a trail camera pointed directly at Emily's grave. Military grade, motion activated, infrared for night vision. We checked it after 3 days. The camera had triggered 47 times. 47 times, it captured the flowers simply appearing between frames. One moment, the ground was bare except for yesterday's wilted bundle. The next frame, 30 seconds later, fresh violets lay in their place. No hands placing them, no figure bending down. Just flowers materializing like they'd grown there in an instant. The footage showed something else too. In several frames, there was a distortion near the grave, a slight blur, like heat shimmer, except it was 52 degrees that night. The blur was person-shaped, kneeling person-shaped. I went to the county records office on my day off, asked to see death certificates for Helen and Robert Chambers. Helen died in 1987, Robert in 1990. Both were buried in a different cemetery across town, in plots they'd purchased near Helen's parents. I stood in the records room, holding those certificates, doing the math. Helen had kept her promise for 34 years, visiting her daughter's grave with violets. But she'd been dead now for 38 years. The flowers kept coming. I stopped working row 9C alone. Not because I was afraid exactly, but because the quiet there had changed. It felt watched. The air seemed heavier near Emily's stone, like standing in front of an open refrigerator. I'd hear things, not voices, but the suggestion of them, the way you might hear your name called from another room, but when you check, no one's there. Other groundskeepers started noticing. Maria, who'd worked mornings for 15 years, refused to enter that section after she saw the flowers appear while she was raking 20 feet away. I looked down for 5 seconds, she told me, hands shaking as she held her coffee mug. 5 seconds, Al. When I looked up, they were just there. Last week, I found something new, tucked under the white ribbon, so small I almost missed it. A tiny note card, the kind that comes with flower arrangements. The handwriting was old-fashioned, feminine, written in faded blue ink that looked decades old. It said, "My darling girl, Mama's here." I keep that card in my wallet. I don't know why, maybe because it's the only proof I have that I'm not imagining this. Maybe because those 3 words carry a weight I can't quite name: love and longing and something else. Something that won't let go, even when it should. The violets still appear every morning. I've stopped trying to explain them. I keep row 9C clear now, the grass trimmed neat around Emily's stone, the pathways clean. It seems like the least I can do. Some promises, I've learned, are stronger than time, stronger than death, stronger than the laws that govern the rest of us. I just wish I understood why they make me so sad. The logs should have been destroyed 40 years ago. I'm Director Hayes, and I run Riverside Memorial Home, a funeral facility that's been in operation since 1928. We're the third oldest mortuary in the state, and we take pride in that continuity. The same wood paneling in the viewing rooms, the same careful protocols, the same respect for the dead and their families. When the building next door came up for sale last year, I jumped at the chance to expand. The structure had been abandoned since 2012, left to rot after Morrison and Sons Mortuary went bankrupt. I thought we'd find outdated equipment, maybe some salvageable furniture. Instead, we found the basement. The purchase paperwork didn't mention a basement. The building inspector's report from 1985 noted a cellar, but it had been marked as sealed foundation issues. When our renovation crew broke through the back wall, they discovered a stairwell that had been drywalled over, the edges plastered so smoothly you'd never know it existed. I went down first with my contractor, Mike, and 2 of his crew. The stairs were solid concrete, much older than the building above. At the bottom, a steel door stood partially open, its hinges orange with rust. The air that drifted up smelled like old paper and something else, formaldehyde, faint but unmistakable, lingering like a ghost of its former concentration. Inside, we found an embalming theater, not a prep room like we use today. This was the old kind, from the early 20th century, when embalming was still considered theatrical, almost ceremonial. A porcelain table dominated the center, raised on an iron pedestal, drain holes corroded but still visible. Cabinets lined the walls, their glass doors filthy but intact. Most were empty. One still held bottles of arterial solution. The liquid inside crystallized into amber chunks. The ceiling was tiled with tin stamped in ornate patterns, and a single light fixture hung above the table, an old surgical lamp, its bulb long dead. But what stopped me cold were the filing cabinets against the back wall, 4 of them, olive green, institutional, each drawer labeled by year, 1958 through 1992. Should we look? Mike asked. I nodded, though something in me wanted to leave them closed. We opened the first drawer, 1958, and found it full of embalming logs, thick ledger-style books, each entry carefully handwritten in blue fountain pen. Names, dates, times, procedures, notes. Standard record keeping for the era before everything went digital. Nothing unusual. We were about to close the drawer when I noticed it. One name appeared multiple times. Subject 71B, Dorothea Marsh. Each entry was dated differently, spanning from April to December of 1962. That didn't make sense. You don't embalm the same person repeatedly. I pulled the 1962 ledger and brought it upstairs to my office, leaving Mike to supervise the cleanup. Under better light, I read through each entry carefully. April 3rd, 1962, Subject 71B, Dorothea Marsh, age 47. Standard arterial preparation, carotid artery injection, formaldehyde solution 2.5%. Subject opened eyes during arterial injection. Sedation protocol applied. May 18th, 1962. Subject 71B, Dorothea Marsh, age 47. Repeat preparation required. Previous embalming appears to have failed. Subject opened eyes during arterial injection. Increased solution concentration. July 2nd, 1962. Subject 71B, Dorothea Marsh, age 47. Third preparation attempt. Subject remains unresponsive to standard methods. Subject opened eyes during arterial injection. Eyes exhibited movement. Tracking examiner. Consultation requested. I stopped reading and called down to Mike. Did you find any other documents? Death certificates, anything? Just the logs, he called back. Lots of them. Why? Because bodies don't get embalmed 3 times. Because eyes don't open during arterial injection, the muscles go slack. The nervous system is shut down. Because the date on that first entry was April 3rd, 1962, and the subject's age was listed as 47. If she died in April, she couldn't need repeated preparation in May, July, and beyond. She'd have been buried or cremated or something. I went back down. The other cabinets held ledgers from different years, but I looked specifically for Dorothea Marsh. I found her 11 times, spread across 3 decades. November 12th, 1967. Subject 71B, Dorothea Marsh, age 47. Fifth preparation. Previous methods unsuccessful. Subject opened eyes during arterial injection. Verbal response noted. Please. January 8th, 1973. Subject 71B, Dorothea Marsh, age 47, 7th preparation. Subject condition deteriorating despite preservation efforts. Subject opened eyes during arterial injection. Extensive movement. Restraints applied. October 19th, 1978. Subject 71B, Dorothea Marsh, age 47, 9th preparation. Ethical review requested. Subject opened eyes during arterial injection. Subject spoke. Help me. September 4th, 1982. Subject 71B, Dorothea Marsh, age 47, 10th preparation. All previous protocols have failed. Subject opened eyes during arterial injection. Subject exhibited full consciousness. Procedure discontinued. The final entry was dated March 27th, 1989. March 27th, 1989. Subject 71B, Dorothea Marsh, age 47. Final preparation. Subject opened eyes during arterial injection. Subject asked, "When will you let me die?" No answer available. I sat on those basement stairs for 20 minutes, holding that ledger, trying to rationalize what I was reading. Maybe it was a teaching hospital that used cadavers for training. Maybe Subject 71B was a code for multiple subjects. Maybe the embalmer had been mentally ill, documenting delusions. But the handwriting was consistent across all 11 entries: careful, methodical, professional. Different embalmers had signed some of the later entries, but the notes were always the same. Subject opened eyes. Subject moved. Subject spoke. I searched county death records for Dorothea Marsh. Found her certificate filed on April 3rd, 1962. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. She'd been 47 years old. There was a burial permit issued. Location listed as Hillside Cemetery, Plot 412. I drove there the next day. Plot 412 was empty. The records showed it had been purchased in 1962, but never used. No internment, no marker, no indication anyone had ever been buried there. Back at the mortuary, I started asking questions. Called retired embalmers who'd worked in the area, funeral directors who'd been in business since the 70s. Most didn't remember Morrison and Sons well. It had been a small operation, family run, kept to themselves, but one retired director, a man named Walter Grange, went quiet when I mentioned the name. "Morrison," he said slowly. "Thomas Morrison. He had a theory about preservation, thought consciousness could be trapped in tissue if you maintained the right chemical balance. Most of us thought he was crazy. State Board investigated him twice, but they never found anything concrete. He died in '93, I think. Place closed soon after." "Did you ever hear about a Dorothea Marsh?" I asked. Long silence. "That was his wife's name. She died young, heart condition. He never remarried." I hung up feeling sick. That night, I went back to the basement alone. I don't know what I was looking for. Closure, maybe, or proof that I was overreacting. The embalming theater looked different in the dark, more like what it was: a tomb for someone's obsessive grief. I stood at the porcelain table, imagining Thomas Morrison standing in the same spot, injecting arterial solution into his dead wife's carotid artery for the 11th time, watching her eyes open, hearing her beg for death he refused to grant. How long had he kept her? The entries spanned 27 years. Had she been stored in one of those cabinets, preserved in formaldehyde, brought out periodically for re-embalming? Had she been conscious for all of it, trapped in dead tissue that wouldn't decay, couldn't decay, because he wouldn't let it? I heard something then, a soft sound, like fabric moving. It came from behind the cabinets. "Hello?" My voice echoed off the tile. Nothing, just the settling of old building, water moving through pipes somewhere above. I left quickly, locking the steel door behind me. We sealed the stairwell the next week, poured concrete into the opening, drywalled over it. I told Mike it was a liability issue. Foundation wasn't sound. The whole basement could collapse. He didn't argue, but I kept one of the ledgers. The one from 1989 with that final entry. I don't know why. Maybe because someone should remember what happened down there. Maybe because Dorothea Marsh deserves to have her story known, even if I can't prove that any of it happened the way those logs suggest. Sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the mortuary, I hear sounds from the wall we sealed. Soft sounds, like someone trying to knock from the other side. 3 times, always at 3 times. Then silence. I tell myself it's pipes, old buildings settling, imagination working overtime. But I remember that last entry, the question Dorothea asked, "When will you let me die?" I hope she found her answer. I hope when Thomas Morrison died, whatever terrible preservation he'd achieved finally broke, letting her rest. But the sounds keep coming, patient and persistent, and I can't shake the feeling that she's still down there, still waiting, still asking questions no one can answer, still opening her eyes. I watched myself on camera doing things I never did. My name is Finn, and I've been a caretaker at Oakmont Cemetery for 11 years. It's a good job. Quiet, respectful work with decent benefits and the kind of predictable routine I need. I walk the grounds twice daily, checking for vandalism or weather damage. I write toppled flower arrangements, clean debris from markers, and make sure the grounds stay presentable for visiting families. Every evening before I leave, I do a final walkthrough, noting anything that needs attention the next day. My route never changes. Neither does my schedule. Plot 447 sits in Section 7, about halfway between the main gate and the old mausoleum. It's a modest grave, nothing special about it, except the amount of attention it receives. Every week, sometimes twice a week, someone leaves photographs there. Not flowers or wreaths, photographs. 8 by 10 prints in clear plastic sleeves, propped against the headstone or weighted down with stones to keep them from blowing away. The grave belongs to Marcus Whitfield, who died in 2015 at age 32. The marker just says his name, dates, and beloved brother. No other family listed. The photos are always of the same subject, a young black man with an easy smile, photographed at various ages. Marcus as a teenager in a basketball uniform. Marcus in his 20s at someone's wedding. Marcus sitting on a porch with a guitar, always alone in the photos, never in a group. I never saw who left them. The photos would just appear between my morning and evening rounds, or sometimes overnight. I assumed it was family, a sibling, maybe, based on the headstone inscription. People grieve in different ways. Some bring flowers, some bring mementos, some bring photographs to remind themselves who they're visiting. It wasn't my business. Then they started appearing face down. The first time, I thought it was wind. Plot 447 sits on a slight rise where weather can catch things. I bent down, turned the photo right side up. Marcus at maybe 25, wearing a college sweatshirt, and replaced the tones holding it. The next morning, it was face down again. 3 more photos had been added, all face down. I mentioned it to Catherine, who manages the cemetery office. Maybe whoever's leaving them is doing it that way intentionally, she suggested. Some kind of personal meaning? That made sense, so I stopped turning them over, but I couldn't shake the oddness of it. Why leave photos at all if you're going to place them face down? What was the point? 2 weeks later, I found all 12 photos that had accumulated arranged in a perfect circle around the grave, all face down, edges touching. The pattern was too precise to be random. Someone had spent time on that arrangement. I took a picture with my phone before disturbing them. That night, I showed Catherine. "This feels deliberate," I said, "like a message or something." She agreed to check the security cameras. Oakmont installed a comprehensive system 5 years ago after repeated vandalism. Cameras cover most sections, including 7. We pulled footage from the previous 72 hours, focusing on Plot 447. What we saw made no sense. At 3:14 a.m. on Tuesday, a figure appeared on camera walking toward Plot 447. The night vision footage was clear enough to see detail. A man in caretaker coveralls, moving with the easy familiarity of someone who knew the grounds. He knelt at the grave, spent several minutes arranging the photographs in that circle, then walked away, disappearing off camera toward the maintenance building. The figure was me. Same height, same build, same gait. Even the coveralls matched mine, including a distinctive bleach stain on the left shoulder I'd gotten 3 months ago. "You didn't come in Tuesday night?" Catherine asked, though she already knew the answer. "We have sign-in logs, time-stamped keycard access. I'd gone home at 5:30 p.m. Tuesday and hadn't returned until 7 a.m. Wednesday." "No," I said. "I was home. I can prove it. My girlfriend and I watched a movie, ordered takeout. I have the receipt." We watched the footage again. The figure moved like me, walked like me, even the way he brushed his hand across his jaw while kneeling. That was my nervous habit, something I do without thinking. But it wasn't me. Catherine reported it to the police. They took statements, reviewed the footage, checked my alibi. My girlfriend confirmed I'd been home all night. The security logs showed my keycard hadn't accessed any gates. The police detective said it was probably someone who looked similar, the night vision footage distorting details. Case closed. No crime had been committed anyway, just photographs rearranged at a grave. But I knew what I'd seen. That was my walk, my posture, my gestures. That was me on camera, doing something I had no memory of doing. I started avoiding Plot 47. When I had to pass it during my rounds, I'd look away, focus on other markers. The photos kept accumulating, and they were always face down now, sometimes in patterns, circles, lines, crosses. Someone was still visiting, still leaving them, still arranging them, while looking exactly like me. Catherine pulled footage twice more over the next month. Each time, same thing. The figure appeared around 3 a.m., always alone, always wearing my coveralls, always moving with my mannerisms. Once, the camera caught a clear shot of the face. It was my face. Not similar, identical, same slightly crooked nose, same scar above my left eyebrow from a childhood fall, same everything. I stopped sleeping well. Every night around 3 a.m., I'd wake up with the irrational fear that I'd somehow gotten out of bed, driven to the cemetery, and arranged photographs at a grave while asleep. But I'd check my car, cold engine, no mud on the tires, check my coveralls, hanging clean in my work locker, check the odometer, no unexplained miles. I was always home, always. In late September, I called in sick on a Tuesday, told Catherine I had the flu, needed to rest. I didn't have the flu. I drove to the cemetery at 2:30 a.m., parked down the street where my car wouldn't be visible, and walked through the unlocked pedestrian gate with a flashlight. Section 7 was pitch black except for the solar lights along the main path. I found a stone bench about 30 feet from plot 447 with a clear view and waited. The night was cold for September, my breath visible in the flashlight beam. I kept the light off, letting my eyes adjust to the dark. At 3:11 a.m., I saw movement. A figure emerged from the direction of the maintenance building, walking steadily toward plot 447. Even in the dark, I recognized the gate. My gate. The figure carried something, a photograph probably, and knelt at the grave, placing it carefully before adjusting the others around it. I stood up, my heart hammering. Hey! The figure froze. Then slowly, it turned toward me. The angle was wrong to see details, just a silhouette against the distant solar lights. But the posture was unmistakable, head tilted slightly, weight shifted to the left leg, hands loose at the sides, the exact way I stand when I'm uncertain. "Who are you?" I called, taking a step forward. The figure didn't respond. It straightened, and for a moment I thought it would run. Instead, it raised one hand in a small wave, a gesture so familiar it made my skin crawl. That's how I wave. Casual, slightly self-conscious, more of a hand lift than a proper wave. Then it walked toward me. I ran. I'm not proud of that, but some instinct deeper than thought took over. I sprinted back to the pedestrian gate, heard footsteps behind me, matching my pace, matching my stride length. I didn't look back. I got to my car, started the engine with shaking hands, and drove home without checking my mirrors. The next morning, I called Catherine and quit. Didn't give 2 weeks' notice, didn't explain beyond saying I had family issues that required my immediate attention. She was understanding, wished me well, said she'd mail my final paycheck. I haven't been back to Oakmont. I got a job at a hardware store, nothing related to cemetery work. I don't watch crime shows anymore, don't read anything about the paranormal. I'm trying to forget the whole thing. But last week, I was walking through a park near my apartment and passed a cemetery on the adjacent block. Smaller than Oakmont, older, stones dating back to the 1800s. And there, near the fence, I saw a man kneeling at a grave, arranging something on the ground. He had my build, my coveralls, bleach stain and all, my way of brushing his jaw when concentrating. He looked up as I passed, and even from 40 feet away, I knew he saw me. He raised his hand in that small, self-conscious wave. I kept walking. I didn't run this time, though I wanted to. I just kept walking, hands in my pockets, eyes forward, pretending I hadn't seen, pretending that I don't see him now, sometimes in crowds, on street corners, in the reflection of store windows, always at a distance, always wearing my face, always watching. I don't know what he wants. I don't know if he's real or if something broke in my mind that night at Plot 447. I don't know if he's me from some other timeline, some other life, bleeding through into this one. All I know is he's still out there, still visiting graves, still leaving photographs face down. And someday, I think he'll come closer. Someday, he'll close that distance between us, and I'll have to look directly at myself. I'll have to acknowledge what I've been running from. I'm not ready for that day. I hope it never comes. But I bought new coveralls last week, different brand, different color. I tell myself it's just practical. My old ones were worn out anyway. But really, I'm trying to make sure that when that day comes, I'll be able to tell which one of us is real. I'm just not sure it will matter. The first tooth appeared on a Monday. I'm Elena Reyes, and I've been a mortician for 16 years. I started young, 22, fresh out of mortuary school, idealistic about dignified death care and serving grieving families. That idealism wore down to something more practical over the years, but I still take pride in my work. I prepare the deceased with care, treat them with respect, and make sure families see their loved ones looking peaceful. It's technical work, emotionally demanding, but it matters. The dead deserve dignity, even if they can't appreciate it. Century Oaks Funeral Home is a mid-sized facility with 3 viewing rooms, 2 preparation suites, and a receiving room where we process new arrivals. That's where I spend most of my time, in the receiving room, doing the initial examination, documentation, and preparation for embalming. It's a clean space, sterile and organized, with stainless steel surfaces and tile floors I can disinfect thoroughly. Everything has its place. I'm meticulous about that. So when I found the tooth on the floor by the drain, I noticed immediately. It was a molar, adult-sized, with one root still attached. No blood, no tissue, clean, like it had been extracted professionally and left to dry. I picked it up with gloved hands, examining it under the light. Healthy tooth, some yellowing but no major decay. No idea whose it was. I checked the log. No procedures the previous Friday that would explain it. No dental work. No oral examinations. We'd had 3 arrivals that week, all elderly, all with full dentition documented in their files. I disposed of it, made a note in my maintenance log, foreign object found, possible contamination from external source, and moved on. Occupational hazard. Sometimes things tracked in on shoes. Sometimes cleaning crews missed spots. Not worth worrying about. The next Monday, there was another molar in the exact same spot. Different tooth. This one had 2 roots, wider crown. Same clean condition, no obvious source. I started paying attention. I documented each tooth with photographs, measurements, position. I checked the receiving room thoroughly every Friday before leaving. Floor, drains, counters, cabinets. Every Monday morning, a new tooth. Always molars, always by the drain, always impossibly clean. After 8 weeks, I had 8 teeth. Marcus, our facility director, thought I was overreacting. Someone's playing a prank, he said. Dental student, maybe. Someone with access who thinks it's funny. Who has access? I asked. You, me, Paul, and Jennifer. That's it. And why would any of us do this? He didn't have an answer, but he changed the locks anyway. New keys for the four of us, new codes for the electronic entry system. I started arriving earlier on Mondays, 6 a.m. instead of 7, hoping to catch whoever was leaving them. The teeth kept coming. Week 9, I found my dental records. They were tucked inside an empty body bag hanging in the storage closet, a bag I'd personally checked the previous Friday. The bag had been sealed in plastic, factory wrapped, unused. I opened it Monday morning to restock the arrival gurney, and there it was, a manila envelope, unsealed, with my name written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside were photocopies of dental x-rays, treatment records, and billing statements from my dentist. Everything current, nothing older than 6 months. The most recent entry was from 3 weeks ago, a routine cleaning. Every tooth documented, every filling noted, every measurement recorded. Someone had gotten into my dentist's files and copied everything. I reported it, called the dentist's office first, then the police. My dentist was horrified, insisted their records were secure, no unauthorized access. The police took a statement, but were skeptical about the connection. Dental records aren't hard to get, the officer said. Insurance companies, previous dentists, medical facilities could be a paperwork mix-up. They were in a sealed body bag in my workplace, I said. That's not a mix-up. They filed a report. Nothing came of it. I stopped going into the receiving room alone. Jennifer, who handles administrative work and occasionally assists with preparations, started coming in early with me on Mondays. We'd check the room together, document everything, make sure we had witnesses. The 10th tooth appeared while we were both standing in the room. We'd arrived at 6, checked the floor, nothing. Jennifer went to the office to file paperwork. I stayed, organizing instruments for the day's scheduled preparation. I turned my back for maybe 30 seconds to retrieve arterial solution from the storage cabinet. When I turned around, a molar lay by the drain. Jennifer came back 5 minutes later. Anything? She asked. I showed her the tooth. She looked at me like I'd placed it there myself. Elena, I was gone 5 minutes. Did you? No, I said. I didn't. It just appeared. She didn't believe me. I saw it in her face, that careful neutrality people use when they think you're lying or losing your grip. She suggested I take some time off, said I'd been working too hard, that stress does strange things. Marcus agreed. They gave me a week of paid leave. I spent that week trying to rationalize everything. Maybe I was placing the teeth myself, some kind of dissociative episode. Maybe the stress of my work had finally broken something in my mind. I researched psychiatric conditions, memory disorders, anything that might explain unconscious behavior. I made an appointment with a therapist. When I came back, 3 teeth were waiting. Jennifer had documented them, taken photos, bagged them as evidence of something. She apologized for doubting me. I checked the room every morning you were gone, she said quietly. They kept appearing. I don't understand it. Neither did I. but I was relieved I wasn't crazy. Or at least, if I was crazy, we both were. Week 14 recognized one of the teeth. I was examining the latest find under magnification, comparing it to my dental records, which I'd started carrying obsessively, checking and rechecking. The crown shape matched one of my molars, same slight curvature, same wear pattern on the chewing surface. I went to the bathroom, stood in front of the mirror, and opened my mouth wide. My teeth were all present. Nothing missing, nothing loose. I ran my tongue over them obsessively, feeling for gaps that weren't there. But the tooth on the receiving room floor matched my x-rays perfectly. It was mine. Somehow, impossibly, it was mine. I made an emergency appointment with my dentist. He examined me thoroughly, took new x-rays, compared them to old ones. Your dentition is completely intact, he said. Nothing's changed. All teeth present and healthy. Then where did this come from? I showed him the bagged tooth. He examined it, checked it against my x-rays, and went very quiet. This is remarkable, he said finally. It's an exact match for your lower right second molar. Shape, size, root structure, even the wear pattern. But your molar is in your mouth. This has to be a coincidence or maybe a very good fake. How would someone fake a tooth? I asked. He didn't know. The teeth kept coming. Week 15, week 16, week 17, each one matched a tooth in my mouth. I documented everything. Photos with my mouth open showing the tooth present, photos of the found tooth, comparison charts. The collection grew. By week 20, I had 20 teeth, and more than half matched my dental records perfectly. I stopped sleeping well. Every morning, I'd wake up and immediately check my teeth, counting them, feeling for gaps. They were always all there, but the collection in the receiving room kept growing. Physical evidence of teeth that should be in my mouth but weren't, couldn't be, because mine were still there. Marcus wanted to bring in a paranormal investigator. Jennifer wanted to call the health department. I just wanted it to stop. Week 23, I found something different. Not a tooth, a note. Small, written in that same unfamiliar handwriting from the envelope. It was waiting on the receiving room table when I arrived Monday morning, weighed down by 3 teeth arranged in a triangle. The note said, "These are all yours. The rest will come when you do." I don't work at Century Oak anymore. I quit that day, packed my belongings, and walked out. Marcus tried to convince me to stay, said we'd involve authorities, get security cameras installed, figure out what was happening, but I knew it wouldn't help. This wasn't something cameras could catch or authorities could stop. I changed careers. I work at a medical supply company now, sales and distribution, nothing involving the dead. I don't talk about what happened. Most people wouldn't believe me anyway. But I check my teeth every morning, count them, feel them, make sure they're all still there. 23 teeth appeared in that receiving room, and I have 32 teeth. That leaves 9. 9 teeth still waiting to show up somewhere. 9 pieces of myself that haven't manifested yet. The note said, "The rest will come when you do." I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means I have to go back to mortuary work, or back to that specific funeral home, or if it means something darker, something final. I just know I'm waiting every Monday morning, No matter where I am, I expect to find a tooth somewhere on my bathroom counter, in my car, on my desk at work. So far, nothing, but the note was clear. They're coming, and when all 32 appear, I'll know it's time. Time for what? I can't say. But I think about that receiving room, about the drain where the teeth appeared, about the body bags and preparation tables, and the careful dignity we afford the dead. I think about becoming what I tended. I think about lying on that stainless steel table while someone else does the preparation. Someone else closes my eyes and folds my hands. I think about whether they'll find my teeth intact or whether they'll be missing. Whether someone, someday, will find them appearing one by one in some other receiving room some other Monday morning. Whether the cycle continues. I hope I'm wrong. I hope the remaining 9 teeth never appear. I hope that note was a threat that never materializes, a promise that breaks. But I don't believe that. I count my teeth every morning and I wait. And Monday mornings fill me with a dread I can't explain to anyone who wasn't there. 9 teeth left. 9 Mondays, maybe. 9 warnings. I'm waiting to see which Monday is my last. The marker shouldn't exist. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, and I work as a historical surveyor specializing in cemetery documentation. It's niche work. State historical societies, preservation groups, genealogical organizations hire me to map old cemeteries, catalog grave markers, and create accurate records before time erodes them completely. I've surveyed over 200 cemeteries across 6 states in the past 12 years. I know how to read stone erosion patterns, identify marker styles by era, and date burials based on carving techniques. I understand cemetery history better than most people understand their own family trees. Westwood Memorial Cemetery hired me in late August to survey their oldest section before beginning restoration work. The cemetery was established in 1912, which made it relatively young by historical standards, but the northeast section, Section A, had been neglected for decades. Trees had grown through pathways, roots had displaced markers, and decades of leaf matter had buried smaller stones completely. The cemetery board wanted a complete catalog before they started clearing vegetation and resetting stones. I work alone most of the time. It's easier, no one talking, no questions, just me, my equipment, and the quiet work of documentation. I use a combination of GPS mapping, ground penetrating radar, photogrammetry, and old fashioned pencil and paper sketching. Each grave gets photographed from multiple angles, transcribed completely, and positioned on a coordinate grid. Methodical, meditative work. Section A took me 3 weeks to survey. Most markers dated between 1912 and 1945, with a few newer burials from the 50s and 60s. Family plots clustered together, stone styles consistent with early 20th century funerary art, simple rectangles and obelisks, granite and marble, Protestant straightforwardness, with occasional Victorian flourishes, nothing unusual, nothing remarkable. Until I found marker 1891K. It sat at the far northeast corner, buried under 18 inches of soil and root matter. I only found it because my metal detector pinged on what turned out to be iron corner posts. I cleared away the dirt carefully. Preservation work requires delicacy, and uncovered a flat granite marker about 3 feet by 2 feet, badly weathered, but still legible. The inscription read, Catherine Westwood, born February 12, 1847, died November 3rd, 1891, first to rest. I sat back on my heels, confused. The cemetery was established in 1912. This marker was dated 21 years earlier. That made no sense. I checked my notes, rechecked the cemetery's founding documents. Westwood Memorial opened on June 1st, 1912, on land purchased specifically for burial purposes. Before that, this had been farmland owned by the Westwood family, hence the cemetery's name. But there were no records of any graves predating the official opening. I photographed the marker from every angle, took rubbings of the inscription, measured the stone's dimensions. Then I set up my ground-penetrating radar. GPR uses radio waves to map subsurface features. It can show you where soil has been disturbed, where voids exist, where materials of different densities meet. It's excellent for finding unmarked graves or verifying that marked graves actually contain remains. I've used it hundreds of times. The scan of marker 1891K's plot showed something impossible. No disturbance. The soil beneath was completely uniform, compacted and undisturbed, exactly like virgin ground. No burial shaft, no casket signature, no human remains. The marker sat on top of earth that had never been dug into. I ran the scan 3 more times, adjusting sensitivity, checking calibration. Same results. Catherine Westwood's grave wasn't a grave. It was just a marker on undisturbed ground. I was repositioning my equipment for a 5th scan when I heard it. 3 knocks, distinct and hollow sounding, like knuckles rapping on wood. They came from directly beneath where I was kneeling. I stood up fast, heart suddenly pounding. The cemetery was empty. I'd been alone all day, no other workers, no visitors. The sound came again. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. I activated my audio recorder. I keep one running during surveys for verbal notes. Recording anomalous sounds at marker 1891K, I said, voice shaking slightly. 3 distinct knocking sounds, subsurface origin. The knocking continued, same pattern, same rhythm, repeating every 10 seconds. Knock, knock, knock. It didn't vary in intensity or speed. Mechanical, persistent, wrong. I checked my watch, 2:47 p.m. I marked the time in my field notes and kept the recorder running. The knocking continued. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I stood there, frozen, listening to something knocking from below ground that shouldn't exist. At 15 minutes, I made myself kneel down, pressing my ear close to the dirt. The knocking was clearer that way, hollow and distant, but unmistakably real. Not tree roots settling, not animal activity, not water moving through soil. This was deliberate percussion, something striking something from inside the earth. I called the cemetery office. Samuel Patterson, the ground supervisor, answered. Sam, it's Dr. Chen. I need you to come to Section A, Northeast corner. Something strange is happening. Strange how? He sounded wary. Cemetery workers develop healthy skepticism about strange from too many visitors claiming to see ghosts. I'm recording knocking sounds from an unmarked grave, or not unmarked, marked but not excavated. Just, please come, listen. He arrived 20 minutes later with two other groundskeepers. By then, the knocking had been continuous for 37 minutes. I played them the audio recording first, then had them listen directly. All three heard it clearly. Could be pipes, Sam said, but he sounded uncertain. Water main runs through this section. Water mains don't knock in patterns, I said, and your records don't show any utilities in this corner. We stood there, 4 adults gathered around a grave that wasn't a grave, listening to sounds that shouldn't exist. The knocking continued its steady rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. 10-second intervals, never varying. At 45 minutes, Sam called the cemetery board president. At an hour and 3 minutes, they brought in a utility locator to check for underground pipes or electrical lines. Nothing. At an hour and 27 minutes, someone suggested calling the police, though nobody could articulate what crime might be occurring. The knocking stopped at exactly 3:04 p.m. 17 minutes of steady 3-knock patterns, then silence. Abrupt, complete silence, like someone had flipped a switch. We waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15. Nothing, whatever had been making that sound, had stopped as deliberately as it had started. Sam wanted to excavate. If something's down there making noise, we need to know what it is. Could be a drainage issue, could be structural. The GPR shows virgin soil, I interrupted. Nothing's been buried there, ever. Then what the hell were we hearing? I didn't have an answer. I spent the next week researching Catherine Westwood. Birth and death records confirmed her existence. She was the daughter of Thomas and Margaret Westwood, the family who'd owned this land in the late 1800s. She died of scarlet fever at age 44, but there was no burial record. No death certificate mentioned a burial location. No local cemetery had her listed. I found her obituary in the county historical archives. It was brief. Catherine Westwood, beloved daughter and sister, passed November 3rd after a brief illness. Private interment per family wishes. Private interment. That could mean anything. Family plot on private land, cremation, donation to medical science. But why place a marker here on what would become cemetery land 21 years later? And why date it 1891 if she wasn't buried here? I went back to Section A 3 more times over the following week. Each visit, I set up my audio equipment and waited. No knocking, complete silence. I examined the marker thoroughly, looking for hollow spaces, mechanical devices, anything that might explain the sound. Nothing, just weathered granite with a carved inscription. On my last visit, I brought a ground auger. Against my better professional judgment, you don't disturb graves or potential graves without proper authorization. I drilled a core sample from directly beside the marker. The soil core showed exactly what the GPR had: undisturbed earth, layers of sediment, compacted naturally over decades, no burial, no disturbance, no explanation. I submitted my survey report to Westwood Memorial with a special addendum about marker 1891K. I documented everything: the impossible dates, the undisturbed ground, the 17-minute knocking event, audio recordings, witness statements. I recommended they treat it as a memorial marker rather than an actual grave, possibly placed by the Westwood family to honor Catherine before the land was sold for cemetery use. The cemetery board accepted my explanation. They reset the marker during their restoration work, cleaned it, added it to their official records as a cenotaph, an empty memorial. Sam told me they haven't heard any more knocking. Whatever happened that afternoon in September hasn't repeated, but I kept the audio recording. 17 minutes and 43 seconds of steady three-knock patterns, recorded on calibrated professional equipment, witnessed by 4 people. I've analyzed it with audio software, filtered out background noise, mapped the frequency patterns. It's not mechanical, it's not environmental, it's percussive sound generated from below ground level at a location where nothing is buried. I play it sometimes late at night when I'm working on other surveys. Knock, 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 never varying, never stopping, for 17 minutes and 43 seconds. Then silence. I think about Catherine Westwood dying in 1891. I think about her family marking a spot on their land where she wasn't buried, placing a stone that said "First to Rest" when she wasn't resting there at all. I think about what might happen when you claim a grave that doesn't exist, when you mark rest for someone who hasn't found it. I think about promises made to the dying. We'll bury you here on the family land where you can rest peacefully. Simple promise, probably sincere, but what if something prevented that burial? What if she was buried elsewhere or not buried at all, but the marker remained, a promise carved in stone that was never fulfilled? What if she's still trying to come home? I've surveyed 43 cemeteries since Westwood Memorial. I've found dozens of anomalies, mismarked graves, forgotten burials, records that don't match physical evidence. But I've never heard knocking again. Never found another grave that wasn't a grave, another marker for someone who wasn't there. Sometimes I wonder if I should have stayed longer that day. If I should have kept recording, kept listening, tried to communicate somehow. 3 knocks. That's deliberate. That's a pattern. Maybe it meant something. Maybe Catherine Westwood was trying to tell us something. But I think about those 17 minutes of steady, patient knocking, and I remember the silence that followed. Complete and final silence, like whatever was making that sound had given up. Like after 134 years, she'd made one last attempt to be heard, to be found, to be brought home to the place her family promised. And when no one answered, when no one understood, she stopped trying. I carry that failure with me. Professional surveyor, historical documentation specialist, expert in cemetery research, and I stood above someone calling from the dark and didn't understand what they needed. The marker still stands in Section A, cleaned and restored, marked in cemetery records as a memorial. Catherine Westwood, first to rest. But she's not resting there. She's not resting anywhere we can find. And somewhere, maybe, she's still knocking, still waiting, still hoping someone will finally understand and bring her home. I listen for it sometimes, on job sites in quiet moments when I'm alone with my equipment. 3 knocks, that pattern, that promise, that plea. I haven't heard it again, but I keep listening, just in case. Some people leave ghosts behind, others become them while they're still breathing. My name is Ortiz, and I've been the security chief at Hillcrest Memorial Gardens for 9 years. Before that, I did private security for office buildings and shopping centers. Clean work, predictable work. When I took this job, I thought a cemetery would be even easier. Dead quiet, as they say. No pun intended. Hillcrest isn't one of those cramped urban cemeteries with graves stacked shoulder to shoulder. We've got 73 acres, most of it rolling hills with oak trees that were here long before the first burial in 1921. The newer sections are well maintained, but there's an older part, Section G, that was abandoned sometime in the 1960s. The graves are still there, but nobody visits anymore. The stones are weathered smooth. The paths are overgrown. I manage a network of 16 security cameras across the property. Most are focused on the main gates, the chapel, and the newer sections where vandalism is a concern. But I've got 2 cameras pointed at Section G, not for security, really, more for record keeping. Sometimes families come looking for old graves, and the footage helps us figure out where people have been walking. It was a Tuesday morning in March when I first noticed him. I was reviewing overnight footage from the weekend, something I do every Monday and Tuesday. Fast forwarding through empty frames, looking for anything unusual. Deer are common, occasionally a coyote. Once in a while, teenagers hop the fence at night, but they never stay long. Something about a cemetery after dark speeds people up, even the brave ones. At 6:47 on Thursday morning, an elderly man appeared on camera 12, which covers the main path through Section G. He was walking slowly, hands clasped behind his back, wearing a long dark coat and a flat cap. His pace was steady, methodical. He followed the path from the southern edge of the frame to the northern edge. Took him about 4 minutes. I wouldn't have thought much of it, except that our gates don't open until 7, and Section G doesn't have a pedestrian entrance. To get there, you'd have to walk from the main gate, which is a good quarter-mile. I checked camera 3, which covers the main entrance. Nobody had come through. I made a note in my log and moved on. The next week, I was reviewing footage again. Thursday morning, 6:47. There he was. Same man, same coat, same path, same steady pace. I went back and checked the previous month's footage. Every Thursday, 6:47, same walk. By the time I'd gone back 6 months, I'd found 26 recordings of the same walk. Always Thursday, always 6:47, never a minute earlier or later. I decided to meet him. The following Thursday, I arrived at Section G at 6:30, parked my cart near camera 12's field of view, and waited. The sun was just starting to rise, throwing long shadows across the graves. The air was cool and damp. I could hear birds waking up in the oaks. 6:47 came and went. Nobody appeared. I waited until 7:15, then drove back to the office and pulled up the footage. There he was, same time, same path, walking right through the area where I'd been standing. I watched it 3 times. The angle was clear. I could see my cart in the frame. I could see the spot where I'd been standing, and I could see him walking past, as solid and real as anything else in the frame. I told myself the timestamp was wrong, some glitch, but I checked the other cameras. All synced, all accurate. The next Thursday, I tried again. This time, I stood directly in the path, right where he always walked. I watched the seconds tick by on my phone. 6:47. I stood there, waiting, scanning the path in both directions. Nothing. When I reviewed the footage later, I watched myself standing there, checking my phone. And then I watched him walk through the frame, passing within 3 feet of where I'd been standing. I started checking the footage every week. He never missed a Thursday. I tried meeting him 4 more times. Same result. I was there. He wasn't. But the camera saw him every time. I pulled the cemetery records for Section G, looking for someone who might match his description. There were 147 burials in that section, most from the 1920s through the 1950s. I found 6 elderly men who'd been buried there, but none of the records mentioned their height or build or habits. Then I found the guest books. We keep old guest books in storage, going back decades. Section G had a small chapel that was demolished in 1973, and the guest books from that chapel were still in a box in our basement. I went through them page by page. In a guest book from 1962, I found a recurring signature, Harold Brennan, every Thursday for 2 years. The handwriting was shaky, but consistent. Next to his name, he'd written the same thing each time, visiting Elizabeth. I found Elizabeth Brennan's grave in Section G. Died in 1960, age 43. Harold wasn't buried there. I checked every cemetery in the county. Found him eventually, 20 miles north at St. Anthony's. Died in 1997. Burial records listed him as a widower, 35 years between her death and his. 35 years of Thursday visits. And apparently, something in him never stopped. I still review the footage every week. He's always there, 6:47, every Thursday. Last month, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I stood in Section G on a Thursday morning, but this time I didn't watch the path. I closed my eyes. I wanted to know if I could feel him, if there was any sense of presence or movement. At 6:47, I felt the air change, not a breeze exactly, more like the feeling of someone passing close by. The kind of displacement you sense rather than see. I opened my eyes. The path was empty, but for just a moment, I could have sworn I smelled Old Spice and tobacco. I checked the footage when I got back. There I was, standing with my eyes closed. And there he was, walking past me, so close his shoulder should have brushed mine. I haven't tried to meet him since. Sometimes I think about what it means to love someone so much that your routine outlives your body, to walk the same path for decades until it becomes the only path you know. to keep a promise that doesn't end just because you do. I don't know if Harold Brennan knows he's dead. I don't know if he's aware of me or the cameras or the fact that Section G has been abandoned for 60 years. But every Thursday at 6:47, he walks that path. And then every Thursday, I watch him on camera 12, hands clasped behind his back, steady and silent, going to visit Elizabeth. I used to think ghosts were supposed to be scary. Now I think they're just sad. Repetition without rest. Love without resolution. I'm retiring in 6 months. I've already trained my replacement. I showed her the footage. She watched it once, nodded, and asked if she needed to file a report. I told her no. Just make a note. Every Thursday, 6:47, some people leave ghosts behind, and some people become them long before they're gone. I found my grandfather's grave 3 weeks before he died. My name is Morgan, and I've been leading restoration projects for historic cemeteries for 12 years. Before that, I did architectural preservation, mostly churches and old theaters. I moved into cemetery work because I liked the combination of history and craftsmanship. Stone carving, metalwork, structural integrity. There's something honest about maintaining places where people remember. Last April, I took on a project at Oakwood Cemetery, a sprawling Victorian era site that had been partially abandoned in the 1970s. The city had finally allocated funds to restore the mausoleum section, which had fallen into serious disrepair. 8 large structures built between 1890 and 1925. Marble facades, stained glass, bronze doors. Beautiful work, all of it neglected for decades. We started with Mausoleum 3, which had a collapsed roof and significant water damage. My team and I spent 2 weeks stabilizing the structure, removing debris, cataloging every vault and marker. Standard procedure, we photograph everything, cross-reference with burial records, and document any discrepancies. On day 16, we found the door. It was behind a false wall in the northwest corner of the mausoleum. We'd been removing water-damaged plaster when the wall crumbled more than it should have, revealing a bronze door about 4 feet high and 3 feet wide. The door had no handle, just a keyhole and a small plaque that read 7. 7. I checked the architectural plans. The mausoleum was designed with 6 vaults, arranged in 2 rows of 3. There was no 7th vault. I checked the burial records. 6 names, all accounted for. Nobody had mentioned a sealed chamber. I called the city's historic preservation office. They sent someone out the next day, a woman named Dr. Reese, who specialized in Victorian cemetery design. She examined the door, checked her own records, and confirmed what I already knew. It wasn't supposed to exist. We decided to open it. It took 3 days to locate a locksmith who specialized in antique mechanisms. When he finally got the door open, the smell that came out was stale air and damp stone, not decay, just old, undisturbed space. Inside was a single vault, smaller than the others. The chamber was maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, with a vaulted ceiling and walls of clean marble. In the center, on a raised stone platform, was a casket. It was beautiful, mahogany with silver handles, polished to a mirror shine, no dust, no corrosion. It looked like it had been placed there yesterday. Dr. Reese photographed everything while I examined the casket more closely. That's when I noticed the plaque on the lid. Engraved silver, ornate script. James Arthur Morgan, beloved grandfather, and then the dates. Born June 14th, 1943. Died May 9th, 2025. I read it twice, then I checked my phone. April 17th, 2025. May 9th was 3 weeks away. My grandfather's name is James Arthur Morgan, born June 14th, 1943. He was in hospice care at the time, about 40 miles from Oakwood. Lung cancer. The doctors had given him a month, maybe 2. I didn't tell Dr. Reese, not immediately. I photographed the plaque, then suggested we seal the chamber and consult with the city before proceeding. She agreed. We locked the bronze door and posted a notice that the area was structurally unstable. That night, I drove to the hospice. My grandfather was sleeping, an oxygen tube in his nose, monitors beeping softly. He looked small in the hospital bed, fragile. I sat with him for an hour, watching him breathe, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I wanted to ask him about Oakwood, if he'd ever been there, if he knew anyone buried there, but he was too weak, and I was too afraid of the answer. Over the next week, I kept working on the mausoleum, but I avoided the northwest corner. My crew asked about the sealed door. I told them it was a storage chamber, nothing interesting. They didn't push, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went back alone on a Saturday, brought my own tools, my own flashlight. I opened the bronze door and went inside. The casket was still there, still pristine. I walked around it slowly, looking for anything I'd missed. The chamber was bare. No other markers, no inscriptions on the walls. Just the vault, the platform, and the casket. I knelt down and examined the lid more closely. The silver plaque was flawless, professionally engraved. But when I looked at the edge of the lid, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Scratch marks. Thin, desperate lines scraped into the interior surface of the mahogany. Not many, just a few, near the latch, like someone had been inside, trying to get out. I backed away from the casket and left the chamber, locked the door, sat outside in the spring sunlight, trying to breathe normally. Scratch marks on the inside of a casket that wouldn't be sealed for 3 more weeks. I called my sister that night, asked her how our grandfather was doing. She said the same, stable, comfortable, fading slowly. I asked her if he'd made any funeral arrangements. She said yes, he'd pre-planned and everything years ago. Cremation, no service, ashes scattered at the lake where he used to fish, no burial, no casket, no mausoleum. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the scratch marks, about the date on the plaque, about the impossible logistics of what I'd found. Who would have put it there? How would they have known? The next morning, I went back to Oakwood with a pry bar. I'm not proud of what I did. I'm a preservationist. I've spent my career protecting historic sites, not vandalizing them. But I needed to know what was inside that casket. It took me 20 minutes to work the latch open, My hands were shaking when the lid finally released. I lifted it slowly, expecting God knows what. The casket was empty, just white satin lining, clean and smooth. No body, no clothing, no personal effects, nothing. Except for one thing. Resting on the pillow where a head would be was a photograph. Old, creased, faded color. It showed my grandfather as a young man, maybe 30, standing in front of a mausoleum. He was smiling, one hand resting on the marble facade. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, was a single sentence. You'll understand when you see it. I put the photograph in my pocket, closed the casket, and locked the chamber. I haven't been back since. My grandfather died on May 9th, 2025. Exactly as the plaque had predicted, my sister handled the arrangements. Cremation, like he'd wanted, we scattered his ashes at the lake on a warm afternoon in June. My mother cried. My sister gave a short speech. I stood there, holding the photograph in my pocket, saying nothing. A week later, I received a call from Dr. Reese. She said the city had decided to permanently seal the chamber in Mausoleum 3. Too expensive to restore, no historical significance. They'd brick up the bronze door and mark it as structurally unsound. I told her that was probably for the best, but I still have the photograph. I've looked at it 100 times, studying my grandfather's face, the mausoleum behind him, the way he's smiling like he knows something I don't. I've tried to figure out where it was taken. The architecture is similar to Oakwood, but not quite the same. I've searched through old cemetery records, historical photographs, anything that might give me context. Nothing matches. Last week, I had the photograph analyzed by a forensic lab. They confirmed it was taken sometime in the early 1970s. The paper stock, the color processing, all consistent with that era. My grandfather would have been about 30 years old in 1973, the same age I am now. I still lead restoration projects. I still work in historic cemeteries. But I don't take contracts at Oakwood anymore, and when my crew finds sealed chambers or unmapped vaults, I let someone else open them. Some doors are meant to stay closed, and some graves are dug long before anyone dies. The first time I saw her, I thought she was lost. My name is Patel, and I've been a cemetery attendant at Riverside Memorial Park for 7 years. It's not glamorous work. I maintain the grounds, direct visitors, help families find grave sites, and lock the gates at sunset. Most days are quiet. People come to grieve, to remember, and then they leave. They don't need much from me except directions and respect. Riverside is an older cemetery, established in 1938. We've got sections that span 8 decades, from the simple granite markers of the Depression era to the elaborate monuments of recent years. The oldest section, where the 1930s and 40s burials are located, is called the Garden of Rest. It's tucked away on the eastern edge of the property, shaded by massive elm trees that were planted when the cemetery first opened. I usually do a final walk through the Garden of Rest around 5:30, about an hour before closing. It's part of my routine, making sure no one's left behind, checking for maintenance issues, ensuring the gates are ready to lock. It was a Tuesday evening in late September when I first saw her standing by grave marker 47 in the Garden of Rest. She was wearing a long black dress, the kind you see in old photographs from the 1940s. Fitted at the waist, modest hem that reached her ankles. She wore a matching hat with a dark veil that covered her face. Her posture was perfect, hands folded at her waist, head slightly bowed. I assumed she was attending a service. Sometimes families request period appropriate dress for memorial services, especially if they're honoring someone from that era. I kept my distance, not wanting to intrude, but there was no service that day. I checked the schedule later. No gatherings, no reserved plots in that section, just regular visiting hours. The next evening, she was there again, same spot, same dress, same posture. I approached her this time, politely, planning to ask if she needed assistance. The cemetery closes at 7, and I wanted to give her enough time to finish her visit. When I got within about 20 feet, she turned her head slightly, as if acknowledging my presence, but she didn't speak. Through the veil, I couldn't make out her features, just the dark shape of her face. I stopped walking. Something about the moment felt wrong, not threatening exactly, just wrong. We'll be closing in about an hour, I said, keeping my tone gentle. Take all the time you need. She didn't respond, didn't nod, didn't move, just stood there, facing the grave. I backed away and finished my rounds. When I came back through the Garden of Rest at 6:30, she was gone. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw her 7 more times, always in the evening, always at the same grave, always in that same black dress and veil. I started arriving earlier, trying to see when she came or how she got there. Riverside has only one entrance, and I monitor it throughout the day. I never saw her arrive. She was just there, as if she'd materialized. On the 3rd week, I decided to check the grave she was visiting. The marker was simple granite, weathered by decades. The inscription read, Eleanor Hastings, beloved wife and mother, 1912 to 1946. I pulled the records for Eleanor Hastings. Died of pneumonia in March of 1946. Survived by her husband, Robert, and 2 children. No other information. No photographs in the file. Nothing unusual. I asked some of the older staff if they knew anything about Grave 47 or anyone who regularly visited it. No one had heard of Eleanor Hastings. The grave hadn't been maintained in years. No flowers, no decorations. Until recently, no visitors. But now, this woman in mourning dress, appearing evening after evening, I started taking photographs. Just for documentation, I told myself, something to show my supervisor if questions came up. The first few photographs came out strangely. The woman was always in frame, but blurred, as if she'd moved at the exact moment I clicked the shutter, even when I knew she'd been standing perfectly still. On the 4th week, I approached her again. It was a Thursday evening, golden hour. The light was soft, filtering through the elm trees. She was in her usual spot, hands folded, veil obscuring her face. "Excuse me," I said, louder this time. I need to know if you're family. We need to update our visitor logs. She turned to face me fully, and then she lifted her veil. Where her face should have been, there was a surface like black glass, reflective, smooth. I could see myself in it, but wrong. The reflection showed me standing in the same spot, but I looked older, much older. My hair was gray, my face deeply lined, my posture bent. I was looking at myself 30 years from now. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a grave marker behind me. When I looked up again, the veil was back in place. The woman stood motionless, watching me. Or not watching. I couldn't tell. I left the Garden of Rest at a near run, locked myself in the maintenance shed, and sat there until closing time, my hands shaking. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. How could I? I barely believed it myself. But I stopped doing evening rounds through the Garden of Rest. I'd walk the perimeter, check the other sections, but I avoided that eastern corner. I assigned the final gate check to our evening security guard, a retired cop named Davis, who didn't ask questions. For 3 weeks, I managed to avoid her. Then one evening, I was locking the main gate when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, measured steps on the gravel path. I turned. She was walking toward me from the direction of the Garden of Rest. Still in that black dress, still wearing the veil, but now she was leaving, heading toward the entrance, toward me. I stood frozen, my hand still on the gate lock. She walked past me, close enough that I could have reached out and touched her dress. She smelled like old fabric and dust, like something that had been stored away for decades. As she passed, she paused, turned her head slightly toward me, and then she lifted her veil again. This time, the reflection was clearer. I saw myself, old and gray, standing in the same spot by the same gate. But in the reflection, I was alone, completely alone. No cars in the parking lot, no lights in the office. The cemetery looked abandoned, overgrown, and I was still working there, still locking the gates, still walking the paths, still here, decades from now, unable to leave. The woman lowered her veil and continued walking. She reached the gate, passed through it somehow without opening it, and disappeared into the twilight. I called my supervisor that night and gave my 2 weeks' notice, told him I'd accepted another job. He didn't seem surprised. Turnover is high in cemetery work. People don't stay long. During my final 2 weeks, I never saw her again, but I felt her every evening when I walked past the Garden of Rest. I felt that same wrongness in the air, that same presence. On my last day, I went to grave 47 one final time. I brought flowers, white roses. I placed them on Eleanor Hastings's grave and stood there for a moment, trying to understand. The grave next to Eleanor's caught my eye. I hadn't noticed it before. The marker was newer, probably placed in the 1990s. It read, Robert Hastings, loving husband, 1910 to 1994. 48 years after his wife died, Robert was finally buried beside her. 48 years of living alone, 48 years of visiting her grave, probably every evening, probably in grief so deep it became routine. I thought about the woman in mourning dress, about the reflection she'd shown me, about spending decades in the same place, walking the same paths, unable to move on. Some people grieve so hard they forget how to stop, and some places hold on to that grief, replaying it long after everyone's gone. I work at a bookstore now. Quiet work, living work. I don't think about Riverside Memorial Park very often, but sometimes, in the evening, when the light goes golden and soft, I catch my reflection in a window or a mirror, and for just a moment, I see myself older, gray haired, alone, still standing in that cemetery, still locking those gates, still trapped in someone else's mourning. I look away quickly, remind myself I'm here, in the present, in the living world. But the reflection lingers, and I wonder how much time I really have before I become the person I saw. Dead people don't hum. I know that now, but for about 6 hours, I wasn't so sure. My name is Kowalski, and I've been driving for Riverside Transport Services for 11 years. We handle deceased transfers between funeral homes, morgues, hospitals, and crematoriums. It's specialized work. You need certification, specific vehicle requirements, and a certain temperament. You're alone a lot. You're handling someone's loved one. You need to be respectful, careful, and comfortable with silence. I've always been comfortable with silence. The route we call Transfer 31 runs from Bellingham Funeral Home to Lakeside Crematorium, a distance of about 43 miles through mostly rural highway. It's a route I've done maybe 300 times. Same roads, same stops, same procedure. On a Thursday morning in October, I got the call to pick up from Bellingham. Single, deceased, female, elderly. Natural causes, cremation scheduled for that afternoon. Standard transfer. I arrived at Bellingham around 9:15. Jim, the funeral director, met me at the back entrance. He's a good guy, professional. We've worked together for years. He helped me load the remains into my vehicle, secured in a standard transport container. We checked the paperwork, confirmed the identification, and I signed off. Quiet one, Jim said, which is his way of saying the deceased looked peaceful. Some funeral directors talk like that. It's their way of maintaining dignity. I nodded, closed the cargo area, and started the drive. The first 20 miles were uneventful. I had the radio on low, some classical station that plays during morning hours. Traffic was light. The sky was overcast but dry. Perfect driving weather. Around mile 22, I heard it. A sound from the cargo area. Soft, rhythmic, almost melodic, humming. I turned off the radio immediately, listened hard. The sound continued, definitely humming. A tune I didn't recognize, low and gentle, like someone humming to themselves while doing household chores. I pulled over onto the shoulder, put the vehicle in park, and sat there for a moment. My heart was pounding. I've transported deceased individuals for 11 years. I've heard all the stories, the urban legends, the supposedly true accounts. I've never experienced anything unusual, not once, but I was hearing humming from the cargo area, where the only thing back there was a sealed transport container with a deceased woman inside. I got out of the vehicle and opened the rear door. The container was exactly as I'd left it, secure, sealed, nothing out of place. I stood there listening, silence. I closed the door, got back in the driver's seat, and sat there for another minute. Maybe it was the vehicle, some mechanical sound I'd misinterpreted, the heater, maybe, or something with the suspension. I started driving again. 5 minutes later, the humming resumed. This time I recognized it as a melody. Simple, repetitive, the kind of tune you'd sing to a child, a lullaby. I kept driving. I didn't pull over. I told myself it was mechanical. It had to be mechanical. I focused on the road, on the white lines, on the mile markers. I turned the radio back on, louder this time, but I could still hear it underneath the music. That soft, persistent humming. By mile 35, I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. The humming hadn't stopped. It had been continuous for over 10 minutes now. Same tune, same gentle rhythm. I called my supervisor, got voicemail, left a message saying I was experiencing a mechanical issue and might be delayed. I didn't mention the humming. I didn't know how. At mile 40, I pulled into a rest stop. I sat in the parking lot with the engine running, trying to think rationally. I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in mechanical explanations and logical reasoning. But I was hearing something that shouldn't be possible. I got out, opened the cargo area again, and placed my hand on the transport container. It was cool to the touch, solid, silent. I waited there for a full minute, listening, nothing. I closed the door and got back in the vehicle. As soon as I started driving, the humming began again. I made it to Lakeside Crematorium at 11:37. I was 45 minutes late. Marcus, the crematorium operator, met me at the receiving bay. He could tell something was wrong. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. Long drive. We transferred the container together. I helped him wheel it into the facility, confirmed the identification one last time, and signed the release forms. My hands were shaking slightly, but Marcus didn't comment. As I was getting back into my vehicle, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Hello? Is this the driver who transported my mother this morning?" A woman's voice, calm, polite. "Yes, ma'am, from Bellingham to Lakeside. I wanted to thank you. The funeral director said you were very respectful with her." "Of course. I'm sorry for your loss." There was a brief pause, then she said, "My mother always hummed, especially when she was at peace. She had this one lullaby she'd hum all the time. She hummed it to me when I was a child. She hummed it to my children. She hummed it in the hospice, even at the end." My throat went dry. "A lullaby?" "Yes, I can't remember the name of it. She learned it from her mother. Very old tune, Russian, I think. She hummed it constantly. It was her way of self-soothing." I sat in my vehicle, phone pressed to my ear, unable to speak. "Anyway," the woman continued, "I just wanted to say thank you for taking care of her. It means a lot." Can you hum it for me?" I asked. "The lullaby?" "I'm sorry. The tune your mother always hummed. Could you hum a few bars?" There was another pause. Then softly, she began to hum. It was the same tune, exactly the same, note for note, the tune I'd been hearing for the last hour, the tune that had come from the cargo area, from the transport container, from her mother. That's beautiful, I managed to say. She thought so too, the woman said. Thank you again. She hung up. I sat in the lakeside parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at my phone. Then I pulled up my dash cam footage. I have a camera in the cargo area, standard for transport vehicles. It records continuously. I scrolled back to mile 22, the moment I first heard the humming. The footage showed the transport container, secure and motionless, no movement, no disturbance, but the audio track captured it clearly, humming, soft and gentle, that same lullaby. It continued for 37 minutes, from mile 22 to mile 40, when I pulled into the rest stop. The moment I opened the rear door, the humming stopped. It resumed when I started driving again and didn't stop until I arrived at Lakeside. I saved the footage. I don't know why. Maybe as proof, maybe just to remind myself I didn't imagine it. That evening, I called the woman back. I'd kept her number from the earlier call. I told her about the humming. I expected her to be upset, or frightened, or disbelieving. Instead, she laughed, not cruelly, gently. She always hated car rides, the woman said. She'd get anxious, especially on long trips. That's when she'd hum. It calmed her down. She was humming in my vehicle, I said, during the transfer. Then she wasn't afraid, the woman replied. That's good to know. We talked for a few more minutes. She told me about her mother, a woman named Dorothy, 86 years old, who'd lived a long and gentle life, who'd raised 4 children, who'd worked as a school teacher for 40 years, who'd hummed constantly, especially when she was content. After we hung up, I went out to my vehicle and sat in the cargo area for a while. I played the dashcam footage on my phone, listening to the humming. It didn't frighten me anymore. It just sounded lonely, like someone trying to comfort themselves during a journey they didn't want to take. I've done transfer 31, maybe 50 times since that October morning. I've transported dozens of deceased individuals along that same route. I've never heard humming again. But sometimes, on long transfers when the highway is empty and the cabin is quiet, I find myself humming that tune. The lullaby, the one Dorothy hummed to her daughter and her grandchildren, and apparently to herself during her final journey. I don't know the words. I don't know the name. I just know the melody, and I hum it sometimes, especially on the longer routes, because I think maybe it helps. Maybe it calms the silence. Maybe it lets whoever I'm transporting know they're not alone. Dead people don't hum. I know that. But maybe, for just a little while, they remember how. And maybe that's enough to get them where they need to go. Patterns matter in cemetery work. Rows, sections, plot numbers. Everything has order, everything has reason, until it doesn't. My name is Briggs, and I've been the operations supervisor at Greenlawn Cemetery for 16 years. I manage layout, plot sales, burial coordination, and record keeping. It's administrative work, mostly. Spreadsheets and databases, and conversations with grieving families. I'm good at it because I like order. I like when things make sense. Greenlawn is a large cemetery, 96 acres spread across gently rolling terrain. We've been operating since 1953. Over 70 years of burials, thousands of plots, dozens of sections, everything organized by date, by family, by geographic location. Last January, I was updating our digital mapping system. We'd been using paper maps for decades, but the cemetery board finally approved funding for a comprehensive GIS database. My job was to digitize 70 years of records, plot by plot, marker by marker. It took me 4 months of careful work, measuring, photographing, cross referencing burial records with physical locations. By April, I had every grave mapped with GPS coordinates. That's when I noticed the pattern. 6 graves, spread across different sections of the cemetery, formed a perfect hexagon when connected on the digital map. Not close to a hexagon. Perfect, each point equidistant from the center, each angle exactly 60 degrees. The probability of that happening by chance is astronomical. I pulled the burial records for all 6 graves. Different families, different years, different circumstances, nothing obviously connected them. Plot 47A, Walter Simmons, died 1960, heart attack. Plot 72C, Barbara Dennison, died 1967, cancer. Plot 114B, Robert Nash, died 1974, car accident. Plot 163A, Helen Cortez, died 1981, stroke. Plot 209D, Michael Torres, died 1988, pneumonia. Plot 247C, Caroline Webb, died 1995, natural causes, 6 graves, 7 years apart, each one, 1960, 1967, 1974, 1981, 1988, 1995. The pattern was perfect. I measured the center point of the hexagon. It fell on an undeveloped section of the cemetery near the northern boundary. According to our records, that area wasn't scheduled for development until the 2030s. But when I checked the plot sales database, I found something that made my hands go cold. Plot 001, pre-purchased 1952, 1 year before the cemetery opened. The buyer's name was listed as Briggs. No first name, just Briggs. I checked the historical records. The cemetery's founder was named Arthur Briggs. No relation to me, or so I'd always been told. I was born in Illinois, moved to this town in 2009. Never heard of Arthur Briggs before taking this job. But according to the deed, Plot 001 was purchased by Arthur Briggs and designated for family use. The plot had never been used. It sat at the exact center of the hexagon, empty, waiting. I started digging into Arthur Briggs's history, the cemetery's founding documents, his personal records, what little existed. He died in 1977, cremated, no burial, no marker. But before he died, he'd sold off all his interest in Greenlawn, except for one thing, Plot 001. He'd maintained ownership of that single plot, transferred it to a trust, and specified it could only be used for the 7th gate. I didn't know what that meant. I started researching the 6 graves, looking for connections beyond the pattern. Walter Simmons had worked as a surveyor. Barbara Dennison was a nurse. Robert Nash was a teacher. Helen Cortez was a librarian. Michael Torres was a mechanic. Carolyn Webb was a pharmacist. Nothing linked them professionally. Nothing linked them socially. Different neighborhoods, different churches, different lives. But then I found the photographs. In the historical archives at the local library, I found a photograph from 1953, a small gathering at Greenlawn's opening ceremony. Arthur Briggs is in the center, smiling, shaking hands with the mayor, and behind him, slightly out of focus, are 6 people: Walter Simmons, Barbara Dennison, Robert Nash, Helen Cortez, Michael Torres, Carolyn Webb, all 6 of them, 7 years before the first death, standing at the cemetery's opening. I brought the photograph to my office and stared at it for an hour. 6 people who would be buried in a perfect hexagon. 6 people who attended the cemetery's opening. 6 people who died exactly 7 years apart. I calculated the next date in the sequence. 1995 plus 7, 2002. I checked our records. No burials at Greenlawn in 2002 matched the pattern. No 7th grave completing the design. 2002 plus 7, 2009. Nothing. 2009 plus 7, 2016. Nothing. 2016 plus 7, 2023. Nothing. But 2023 plus 7, 2030, 5 years from now. I measured plot 001's dimensions. Standard size, single burial. The deed specified it was reserved, but it didn't specify for whom, just the 7th gate, and the name Briggs. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, a strange pattern with no meaning, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Last week, I was going through some old personnel files and found my employment application from 2009. I'd listed my mother's maiden name on the emergency contact form. Briggs. My mother's maiden name is Briggs. I called her that night, asked her about family history. She told me what I already knew. Her father, my grandfather, was from this region originally, left in the 1950s, moved to Illinois, died when she was young. What was his first name? I asked. Arthur, she said. Arthur Briggs. Why? I didn't answer. I thanked her and hung up. Arthur Briggs was my great-grandfather, the man who founded Greenlawn Cemetery, the man who purchased Plot 001 and designated it for family use, the man who somehow orchestrated 6 burials in a perfect hexagonal pattern, each 7 years apart. And now I'm the operations supervisor at the cemetery he founded, living in the town he left, working at the place he built. I pulled the deed for Plot 001 again. Read it carefully. The trust specified that the plot would remain reserved until the pattern is complete. Then it would revert to family use. The pattern: 6 graves, 7 years apart. The 7th position at the center designated for a Briggs. I'm 43 years old. I'm in good health. I don't have any chronic conditions. But I can't stop thinking about 2030, 5 years from now. 7 years after the last grave in the pattern should have been filled. I've started keeping track of dates, marking them on my calendar. 2037, 2044, 2051, 7 years apart, always 7 years. I don't know what the pattern means. I don't know what but the seventh gate refers to. I don't know why my great grandfather designed this, but I know that plot 001 is waiting, and I know that my name, Briggs, is on the deed. Last month, I received a letter from the cemetery's legal department. Routine paperwork, they said. Updating beneficiary information for employee burial benefits. Standard procedure. One of the questions asked if I had any plot preferences at Greenlawn. I left it blank. But last night I had a dream. I was standing at the center of the hexagon at plot 001. The 6 graves around me were occupied, fresh flowers on each one, and I was holding a shovel, digging, not digging down, digging up. When I woke up, my hands were cramping, like I'd been gripping something for hours. I went to work this morning and pulled up the digital map, zoomed in on the hexagon. 6 graves, perfect pattern, empty center. I measured the distance from my office to plot 001, 670 feet. I don't know why that number matters. I don't know why I measured it, but I wrote it down, 670 feet, 7 times 95. I keep the photograph from 1953 on my desk now. Arthur Briggs shaking hands with the mayor, and behind him, the 6 people who would form the pattern. Sometimes I look at the empty space next to my great-grandfather in the photograph, the space where someone else should be standing, where the 7th person should be. And I imagine myself there, standing at the cemetery's opening 72 years before I was born, waiting for the pattern to complete, waiting to become the 7th gate 5 years from now, or 7 years after that, or 7 years after that. The pattern doesn't end. It just continues, and I'm part of it now, whether I want to be or not. I found recordings of procedures I haven't performed yet. My name is Jude, and I've been an embalmer for 14 years. I work at Cartwright Funeral Home, a family-owned operation that's been serving this community since 1938. It's old-fashioned work, careful, precise. You're preparing someone's loved one for their final viewing, and that responsibility weighs on you, or it should. The prep room where I work is called Room 4. It's in the basement, tucked away from the public spaces upstairs. Stainless steel tables, proper ventilation, industrial lighting, everything clean and professional. I've worked in that room almost every day for the past 8 years. Last March, I was cleaning out a storage cabinet in Room 4 and found a shoebox pushed far back on the top shelf. It was sealed with packing tape, yellowed and brittle. No label, no indication of what was inside. I opened it. Inside were 12 cassette tapes, the kind people used in the 1980s and 90s. Each tape was labeled with a date and a name. The handwriting was neat, precise, clinical. The first tape was labeled March 7th, 2012, Patricia Morrison. I remembered Patricia Morrison. She'd been one of my first cases when I started at Cartwright. Elderly woman, natural causes, straightforward preparation. I found an old cassette player in the funeral home's storage room, brought it down to Room 4, and played the first tape. It was my voice, not similar to my voice, not someone who sounded like me, my exact voice, describing the embalming procedure for Patricia Morrison in clinical detail. Every step, every measurement, every observation. I'd never recorded any of my procedures, never had reason to. But there it was, my voice, documenting work I'd done 12 years ago. I played the second tape. August 19th, 2013, Marcus Chen. Again, my voice. Another procedure I remembered, another detailed documentation. I went through all 12 tapes. Each one documented an embalming procedure I'd performed, each one in my voice, each one dated accurately, but I'd never made these recordings. The last tape was different. Instead of 12 recordings, there were 19 tapes total. I'd miscounted. The final 7 were labeled with future dates. January 11th, 2026, David Foster. September 23rd, 2026, Linda Grayson. February 8th, 2027, Robert Patterson. June 14th, 2027, Angela Reeves. October 31st, 2027, Christopher Walsh. March 17th, 2028, Jennifer Blackwood. July 9th, 2028, Michael Briggs. 7 recordings, 7 people, all dated in the future. The earliest was less than a year away. I played the first future recording. My voice, calm and professional, documented the embalming procedure for David Foster. Cause of death, cardiac arrest, age 62, received at Cartwright Funeral Home on January 11th, 2026 at 9:30 a.m. The recording was complete, detailed, as thorough as all the others. But David Foster hadn't died yet. The recording was dated 10 months in the future. I checked our obituary records. No David Foster. I searched online, found the 3 David Fosters in the area, all alive. I played the second tape, Linda Grayson. My voice described her preparation in the same clinical detail. Cause of death, stroke, age 78. I found Linda Grayson online. She was a retired teacher, active in local theater. She had a Facebook page with recent posts, very much alive. I didn't play the other tapes, not immediately. I sat in room 4 for a long time, staring at them. 7 cassettes, 7 people who would die, 7 procedures I would perform, according to my own voice. I took the tapes home, locked them in my desk drawer, told myself I'd throw them away, that they were some kind of elaborate prank. Maybe a former employee with a good voice impression, maybe audio manipulation, but I couldn't throw them away. On January 11th, 2026, I got the call a man named David Foster had died of cardiac arrest. His family had requested Cartwright Funeral Home. He was 62 years old. I received him at 9:30 a.m. Everything matched the recording, the time, the age, the cause of death, everything. I performed the preparation in a kind of trance. Every step felt predetermined. Every movement felt scripted. I knew exactly what I'd find when I opened the arterial site. I knew exactly how the tissue would respond to the embalming solution because I'd already recorded it. Or I would record it. Or I had recorded it in some version of time I didn't understand. When I finished, I went home and played the tape again. Listened to my voice describe the exact procedure I'd just completed. The recording was identical to what I'd done, word for word, detail for detail. I checked the date on the tape. It had been recorded in room 4, but the cassette itself looked old, decades old. The label was faded. The tape inside was worn. How could I record something decades ago that I just did today? Linda Grayson died on September 23rd, 2026. Stroke, age 78. Her family called Cartwright. I performed her preparation exactly as the recording described. Robert Patterson died on February 8th, 2027. I knew he would. The tape told me. 3 recordings have come true now. 3 people dead. 3 procedures performed exactly as documented. 7 tapes remain. 4 more deaths in the next 18 months, then 3 more after that. I know their names. I know how they'll die. I know when Cartwright will receive them. Angela Reeves will die on June 14th, 2027. She's alive right now. I looked her up. She's a dental hygienist, married, 2 children. She posts pictures of her family on Instagram. She has 4 months left. Christopher Walsh, October 31st, 2027. Halloween, he's a college student. Plays guitar in a local band. 19 years old. Jennifer Blackwood, March 17th, 2028. She works at the public library. I've seen her there. She helped me find a book last month. We talked about the weather. Michael Briggs, July 9th, 2028. I don't know him, haven't found him online, but I will when Cartwright receives him, when I prepare him, when I fulfill the recording that already exists. I've thought about warning them, about calling Angela Reeves and telling her to see a cardiologist, about finding Christopher Walsh and telling him to be careful on Halloween. But the recordings are so specific. Cause of death, time of death, method of injury or illness. How do you prevent something that's already been documented? How do you change something that's already happened, just in the wrong order? I've started listening to my voice on the tapes differently, trying to hear emotion, trying to hear hesitation or fear or anything that suggests I understand what's happening. But I sound professional, calm, clinical, like I'm documenting routine work, like I don't know these people will die because I have recordings that say they will. Or maybe I do know, maybe that version of me, the one who made the recordings, understands something I don't yet. Maybe by the time I record the 7th tape, I'll understand why. Last week, I found another shoebox in the storage cabinet. Same shelf, same placement. This one contained a cassette recorder with a microphone and a stack of blank tapes. 12 blank tapes, the same number as the original recordings, the ones that documented procedures I'd already done. I haven't touched the recorder. I've left it in the cabinet, but I know what it's for. Eventually, I'll use it. Eventually, I'll record the procedures for David Foster, Linda Grayson, Robert Patterson, all 12 of them, and then I'll record 7 more. 7 procedures that haven't happened yet. 7 people who are alive right now. 7 deaths that will come true because I documented them. Or maybe they'll come true and then I'll document them. I don't know which comes first anymore. The recording or the death or the recording. Angela Reeves has 4 months left. I see her name every time I close my eyes. June 14th, 2027. I know how she'll die. I know what I'll find during the preparation. I know every detail because I've already recorded it, or I will record it, or both. Time doesn't work the way I thought it did, and I'm trapped in a loop I don't understand, preparing the dead according to recordings I made but haven't made yet. 7 tapes remain, 4 months until the next one comes true. And somewhere in room 4, in a storage cabinet on the top shelf, a cassette recorder waits for me to document what hasn't happened yet, or what's already happened, or both. I'll know when it's time. My voice will tell me. I found a book that predicts death. My name is Lynn, and I'm the records archivist at Meadowbrook Cemetery. I've held this position for 6 years. Before that, I worked in university archives, preserving historical documents and managing databases. Cemetery work is similar, just quieter, more permanent. Meadowbrook was established in 1893. Over 130 years of burials, thousands of records, ledgers, plot maps, correspondence, photographs, all of it stored in the archive room beneath the cemetery's administrative building. My job is to digitize and preserve these records. It's slow work. Each document needs to be carefully scanned, cataloged, and cross-referenced. Some days I only get through 10 or 15 pages. But I don't mind. I like the rhythm of it, the quiet focus. Last November, I was working through a box of ledgers from the 1920s when I found a book that didn't match the others. It was smaller, leather-bound, hand-stitched. The cover was unmarked, but when I opened it, I found page after page of handwritten entries, names, dates, plot numbers, a burial registry, but the entries were written in future tense. Margaret Sullivan will be buried in Plot 47C on June 3rd, 1928. Thomas Brennan will arrive on August 17th, 1931. Dorothy Chen will request Section B, Plot 12, on October 9th, 1934. Will be buried, will arrive, will request. I flipped through the pages, hundreds of entries, all written the same way, all dated between 1926 and 1987. The handwriting was consistent throughout. Same pen, same hand, same careful script. Someone had written this entire registry before any of the burials occurred. I cross-referenced the first entry. Margaret Sullivan, Plot 47C, died June 3rd, 1928. The official burial record matched exactly. I checked the second entry. Thomas Brennan, August 17th, 1931. Perfect match. Dorothy Chen, October 9th, 1934. Exact match. I spent the next week cross-referencing every entryway in the book against our official records. 347 names, 347 predictions. Every single one was accurate. Every name, every date, every plot number. Someone had documented 61 years of deaths before they happened. The last dated entry was May 22nd, 1987. A man named Peter Voss, Plot 114B. I checked the records. Peter Voss was buried at Meadowbrook on May 22nd, 1987, the last accurate prediction, but the registry didn't end there. After Peter Voss, There were 40 more entries, no dates, just names and plot numbers. Sarah Mitchell will be buried in Plot 73A. David Carver will arrive for Section D, Plot 18. Robert Shaw will request cremation, ashes in Plot 92C. 40 names. 40s, future burials. No dates specified. I searched our current records. None of these people had been buried at Meadowbrook. I searched obituaries, found a few of the names, but they'd been buried elsewhere, or cremated elsewhere, or still alive. The predictions had stopped working after 1987, or they hadn't happened yet. I researched the registry itself. The paper was consistent with 1920s manufacturing. The ink was iron gall, common in that era. The binding was hand-done, professional work. Everything suggested it had been created in the 1920s and filled out over time. But that was impossible. You can't predict 60 years of deaths with perfect accuracy. I found a notation on the inside cover. Small, almost invisible, a single line of text in the same handwriting, compiled by E. Blackwood, Superintendent, December 1925. I searched cemetery records for E. Blackwood, found him, Edwin Blackwood, Superintendent of Meadowbrook Cemetery from 1923 to 1951. Died in 1951 at age 73. There was a photograph of him in the historical files. A serious man, thin face, wire-rimmed glasses. He stood in front of the cemetery gates, hands clasped behind his back. I found his personnel file, exemplary record, meticulous bookkeeping, no disciplinary issues, no mention of the registry. I checked the plot numbers for the 40 unfulfilled predictions. They were all real plots, some already occupied, which was strange. Why predict a burial in a plot that was already full, unless the predictions weren't meant for those plots specifically, unless the predictions were meant for the people? I started researching the names. Sarah Mitchell, 42 years old, accountant, married, lives in the next county. David Carver, 67 years old, retired postal worker, lives 3 miles from Meadowbrook. Robert Shaw, 55 years old, high school teacher, lives in town, all alive, all within 50 miles of the cemetery. The registry had predicted their deaths, just hadn't predicted when. I made a list of all 40 names, started tracking them, not invasive surveillance, just public records, obituaries, social media, making sure they were still alive. Most of them were. 37 out of 40. 3 had died in the last 20 years, but none of them had been buried at Meadowbrook. Sarah Mitchell's father had died in 2009, buried in his family plot in another town. David Carver's wife had died in 2015, cremated, ashes scattered. Robert Shaw's mother had died in 2019, buried at Meadowbrook in Plot 92C, the plot the registry had predicted for Robert Shaw himself. I checked the burial record. Edith Shaw, cremation ashes interred in Plot 92C, family plot, pre-purchased by Robert Shaw in 2018. The plot was purchased for family use. Robert Shaw's name was on the deed. He'd intended it for himself eventually, but his mother had died first, and he'd used it for her ashes. The registry had predicted his burial in that plot. but his mother was buried there instead. The prediction was wrong, or displaced, or fulfilled by proxy. I kept tracking the other names, looking for patterns. 3 more deaths over the next 8 months. None buried at Meadowbrook. 1 buried out of state. 1 cremated without burial. 1 buried in a municipal cemetery. The predictions were failing, or the predictions were being avoided somehow. Then, last month, I got a call from one of the funeral homes we contract with. They had a deceased individual whose family wanted burial at Meadowbrook. Did we have availability? I checked the name. David Carver. I've sold up the registry. David Carver will arrive for Section D, Plot 18. Plot 18 in Section D was available, had been available since 1968. I told the funeral home we had space, gave them the plot information. They confirmed with the family. David Carver was buried in Plot 18, Section D on October 7th, 2024, exactly as the registry predicted, 98 years after it was written. I checked the remaining names, 39 left, including one that made me stop breathing. Thomas Lynn will request Section F, Plot 8 for family use. Lynn, my surname. I searched the other entries. Just one Lynn in the entire registry. Thomas Lynn. My father's name is Thomas Lynn. He's 72 years old, retired engineer, lives in California. We talk every few weeks. I've never mentioned Meadowbrook Cemetery to him, never discussed my work in detail. He doesn't know I'm an archivist here, but the registry knows his name. The registry predicts he will request a plot at Meadowbrook for family use. Section F, Plot 8. I checked the records. Available. Has been available since 1953. I called my father last week. Casual conversation. Asked him about family history, about his parents, my grandparents. Did we ever have family in this area? I asked. No, he said. Why? Just curious about genealogy. He paused. Actually, my grandfather might have. Your great-grandfather. He left the area before I was born. I don't know much about him. What was his name? Lin Wei. He emigrated in the early 1900s, worked as a groundskeeper somewhere, a cemetery, I think. I pulled cemetery employment records, found him, Lin Wei, groundskeeper at Meadowbrook from 1921 to 1947. He worked here the same years Edwin Blackwood was superintendent, the same years the registry was compiled. My great-grandfather worked at Meadowbrook Cemetery, and now I work here. And the registry predicts my father will purchase a family plot. Section F, Plot 8. The same section where Lin Wei is buried. Plot 6, 2 plots away. I haven't told my father. I don't know what I would say, but I know that eventually he'll call me. He'll ask about cemeteries in the area. He'll want to know about family plots, about being buried near his grandfather, and I'll tell him about Section F, Plot 8. Because the registry says I will. Because the registry has been right 348 times. Because something that predicts the future with perfect accuracy doesn't stop being right just because you understand it. 39 names remain. 39 deaths waiting to fulfill predictions made almost a century ago. And one of them is my father. I keep the registry in my desk now. Locked drawer, I check it every morning, making sure the entries haven't changed, making sure the predictions remain the same. They do. The handwriting never changes. The ink never fades. The pages never age. Thomas Lynn will request Section F, Plot 8, for family use. Will request, future tense, still waiting, still coming, and I'll be here when he calls. Because I work at Meadowbrook. Because my great grandfather worked at Meadowbrook. Because the registry knew 98 years ago that I'd be the one to help him. Some patterns don't break, they just wait. Something was digging its way up from Section K. My name is Torres, and I work night security at Pinewood Cemetery. I've been on the night shift for 4 years. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 4 nights a week. It's solitary work, which suits me fine. I walk the grounds, check the perimeter, monitor the gates. Most nights, nothing happens. That's how I like it. Pinewood is a medium-sized cemetery, about 40 acres. The older sections date back to the 1930s. Section K is the oldest, tucked against the western fence line. The graves there are weathered, the stones leaning at odd angles. Few visitors come to Section K anymore. Most of the people buried there have no living family. On a Tuesday night in September, I heard digging sounds coming from Section K. It was around 2 a.m. I was doing my second perimeter walk, flashlight in hand, when I heard it. The distinct sound of a shovel biting into earth, metal scraping against dirt and stone. I stopped walking, listened carefully. The sound continued, rhythmic, steady. Someone was digging. I approached Section K quietly, keeping my flashlight off. Grave robbery is rare, but it happens. Usually kids looking for jewelry or historical artifacts. Sometimes addicts looking for anything valuable. But when I reached Section K, I found no one. The digging sound continued, but there was no one there. No vehicle, no disturbed earth, just rows of old graves in the darkness. I turned on my flashlight and walked through the section slowly, checking each plot. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, close but distant. Underground, but right at the surface. After about 10 minutes, it stopped. I filed a report. Possible wildlife, I wrote. Maybe a large animal digging near the fence line. The next night, I heard it again. Same time, same location. This time, I brought a better flashlight and a handheld radio. I searched Section K thoroughly, checked every grave for signs of disturbance, looked for animal burrows, disturbed soil, anything that could explain the sound. I found Plot 34B. The earth around the grave was different, not freshly disturbed exactly, more like it had settled unevenly. The ground had a slight dome to it, as if something beneath had pushed upward. The grave marker was simple granite. James Mercer, beloved son, 1914 to 1947. The digging sound had stopped by the time I found the plot. I stood there for a while, listening, nothing. In the morning, I mentioned it to the groundskeeper, a man named Paul who'd worked at Pinewood for 20 years. He came out to Section K and examined Plot 34B. Ground settles weird sometimes, he said, especially in the old sections. Caskets deteriorate, vaults collapse, creates voids. What about the sound? I asked. He shrugged. Could be anything. Animals, roots, water drainage. That night, I heard the digging again, plot 34B. But when I arrived, I found another plot disturbed, plot 47A. The earth pushed up from below, forming a low mound. The grass was intact, but the soil underneath had shifted. The digging sound was louder now, more urgent. I could hear it clearly, coming from directly beneath my feet. I stood on plot 47A and felt vibrations through my boots. Something moving below, something working its way up. I stepped back, waited. The digging continued for another 5 minutes, then stopped. In the morning, Paul found a third plot disturbed. Plot 19C, same pattern. Earth pushed up, grass undisturbed. Whatever was moving below was doing it carefully. We should exhume, I said. Check the caskets. Paul shook his head. You know how expensive that is? How much paperwork? We'd need family permission, court orders. For what? Some settling soil? Something's digging, I said. Then we'll set up cameras, see what we catch. We installed 3 trail cameras in Section K, motion activated, night vision, pointed at the 3 disturbed plots. The 4th night, I heard the digging again, this time at plot 8D. I went to check the cameras. All 3 had triggered, but the footage showed nothing, just empty graves, undisturbed ground. The motion sensors had detected something, but the cameras captured nothing, except the sound. The audio track on all 3 cameras recorded the digging, clear and unmistakable, the sound of something scraping upward through soil. I stood in Section K and counted the disturbed plots. 4 now, plot 34B, plot 47A, plot 19C, plot 8D, all in different areas of Section K. No pattern I could see. The 5th night, plot 51B, the 6th night, plot 12A, the 7th night, plot 29C, 7 plots, 7 nights. A woman pushed up from below. Paul and I examined them during the day. The disturbance was consistent. Earth displaced upward, grass intact, no visible entry point. Whatever was causing it was working from underneath. We need to dig one up, I said, just to see. Paul finally agreed. We chose plot 34B, the first one disturbed. We got the necessary permissions, hired a backhoe, and started excavating on a Thursday morning. The casket was 6 feet down, as expected. Standard burial depth for 1947. But when we exposed the top of the casket, we found something that made Paul back away from the grave. Scratch marks. Deep gouges in the concrete vault lid, fresh scratches, recent, cutting through decades of soil staining. Something had been scratching at the vault from inside. We lifted the vault lid. The casket beneath was intact but marked. More scratches, concentrated around the lid's seal. We're not opening it, Paul said. No way. I agreed. We reburied plot 34B and contacted the cemetery's management. They brought in a structural engineer to examine the other disturbed plots. His assessment, natural settling, soil compression, nothing unusual. He didn't hear the digging sounds. He didn't see the scratch marks. The 8th night, I heard it again, this time at plot 3F. but I was standing on plot 3F when it started. The digging sound came from directly beneath my feet. I felt the vibrations through the ground, felt the earth shift slightly, like something heavy was moving below. I stepped off the plot. The digging continued. I could track the sound, moving from the center of the grave toward the edges, working methodically, scraping upward. Then it stopped. I knelt down and pressed my hand against the ground. The soil was warm, not hot, just warm, like body temperature. Something down there was generating heat. The ninth night, I arrived at Section K early, before the digging usually started. I wanted to be there when it began. At 1:57 a.m., I heard the first scrape, not from any of the previously disturbed plots, from directly beneath where I was standing. I looked down. I was standing on plot 17B. The ground trembled slightly. Then the digging began, directly under my feet. I jumped back, watched as the earth over plot 17B began to shift, not violently, slowly. The grass rippled, the soil compressed and expanded. Something underneath was pushing up. I should have run. I should have called for help. But I stood there, flashlight pointed at the ground, watching the grave come alive. The digging sound intensified. I could hear scraping, scratching, the distinct sound of fingernails or bone against wood. The earth bulged upward, forming a mound about 6 inches high. Then it stopped. The ground settled. The sounds ceased. Everything went quiet. I waited for an hour. Nothing else happened. In the morning, I found that plot 17B showed the same disturbance as the others. Earth pushed up, grass intact. No visible cause, but I knew the cause. Something in the graves was digging. Not animals, not roots, the bodies themselves, or what remained of them, working their way toward the surface. I quit that night, gave Paul my resignation. Didn't explain, he didn't ask. But before I left, I checked the cemetery records. The 9 disturbed plots, 9 burials, James Mercer, 1947, Eleanor Hastings, 1946, Robert Vance, 1948, Catherine Moore, 1945, Thomas Wright, 1949, Dorothy Chen, 1947, William Foster, 1946, Patricia Morrison, 1948, and David Torres, 1947, all buried between 1945 and 1949, all within a 4-year span. I researched the deaths, all natural causes according to the records, all prepared by the same funeral home, Blackwood and Sons, all embalmed by the same person, E. Blackwood, the funeral director. I found an article from 1950. Edwin Blackwood had been arrested for improper burial practices, allegations of premature burial, embalming people who weren't quite dead. The charges were dropped. Insufficient evidence. He died in 1951, never faced trial, but 9 people buried between 1945 and 1949. 9 people prepared by Edwin Blackwood. 9 graves now disturbed from below. 9 people digging their way up, 75 years too late. I don't work at Pinewood anymore. I got a job doing security at a shopping mall, day shift, fluorescent lights, living people. But I still think about Section K. about those 9 plots, about what's underneath. Still digging, Paul called me last week, said the disturbances have stopped. No more digging sounds, no more shifted earth. I didn't ask why they stopped. I think I know. They finished digging, and now they're just waiting, waiting for someone to open the graves, waiting for someone to let them out, waiting for the last 75 years to finally end. I'm not going back. Someone else can answer that question. Someone else can find out what happens when the digging stops, when the scratching ends, when the graves finally open from below. The bell rang 127 times in 1883. Then it stopped. My name is Wade, and I'm a cemetery historian. I research burial practices, document historic grave sites, and help preserve 19th century cemetery infrastructure. It's specialized work. Most people don't think about the mechanical systems built into old cemeteries, but they're there. Drainage systems, iron fencing, and sometimes safety coffins. Safety coffins were popular in the late 1800s. The fear of premature burial was very real. People requested elaborate systems, bells connected to strings that ran down into the casket, speaking tubes, flags. If someone woke up after burial, they could signal for help. Most of these systems were removed decades ago. They didn't work well. Decomposition would trigger false alarms. Animals would disturb the mechanisms. Families found them morbid, but sometimes you find one still intact. I was documenting Riverside Cemetery, a small site established in 1879, about 200 burials, mostly from the 1880s and 90s. The cemetery had been abandoned in the 1960s, then partially restored in the 2000s. I was photographing grave markers when I found it. Plot 47. The stone was simple granite. Elizabeth Marsh, born 1851, interred November 1883. Next to the stone was a cast iron post, about 4 feet tall, with a bell housing at the top. The bell was still there, weathered but intact. A thin cable ran from the bell down into the ground. A safety coffin system, still connected after 140 years. I documented the site carefully, photographed the bell, the housing, the cable, checked the cemetery records at the local historical society, found Elizabeth Marsh's burial documentation. She'd died of typhoid fever, age 32. The family had requested a safety coffin with bell system. Cost $15 additional. Installed by J. Morrison, cemetery caretaker. There was a logbook entry dated December 1883, 1 month after Elizabeth Marsh was buried. Bell at plot 47 rang multiple times overnight. Duration 3 hours. Count 127 rings. Investigated at dawn. No evidence of disturbance. Bell mechanism appeared to function correctly. No action taken. 127 times. 3 hours of ringing, and then it stopped. I sat in the Historical Society reading room for a long time, staring at that entry. The handwriting was neat and precise, factual, no emotion, just documentation. Someone had counted, someone had stood in that cemetery and counted 127 rings while a woman pulled a string in her casket, trying to signal that she was alive, or trying to signal something else. I went back to Riverside Cemetery the next day, examined the bell system more closely. The cable was corroded, but appeared intact. The bell's clapper was frozen with rust. It shouldn't ring anymore, couldn't ring anymore, but I wondered if it had ever stopped. I researched safety coffin protocols, found that most cemetery caretakers were instructed to check ringing bells immediately, dig up the coffin if necessary. The whole point was to prevent premature burial deaths. But Jay Morrison had waited until dawn, had counted the rings, but hadn't excavated. Why? I found Morrison's personnel record. He'd been cemetery caretaker from 1881 to 1903, 22 years of service. The log entry about Elizabeth Marsh's bell was his only mention of a ringing incident. No other plots at Riverside had safety coffins. Just Elizabeth Marsh, just plot 47. I started photographing the site at different times of day, documenting the bell system from multiple angles. I wanted a complete record before recommending whether it should be preserved or removed. On my third visit, I was photographing the bell housing when my phone rang. Not my ringtone, something else. A notification I didn't recognize. I checked my phone. One missed call. The number was listed as a landline, local area code. I didn't think much of it. Spam calls happen. I went back to photographing. Then I looked at the number more carefully. It was formatted strangely. Just 7 digits, no area code prefix. The kind of number you'd see from the 1880s, before the modern phone system existed. I checked the call log. The timestamp said 3:47 p.m. The duration said 0 seconds. A missed call from a number that shouldn't exist. From a phone system that wasn't invented yet when Elizabeth Marsh was buried. I looked at the cemetery records again. The plot number for Elizabeth Marsh's grave was 47. I felt cold. I called the number back, hands shaking slightly. It rang once, then a recorded message. The number you have dialed is not in service. But it had called me, or something had. I stayed at the cemetery until sunset, photographing, documenting, trying to make sense of it. As I was packing up, I heard a sound, faint, metallic. The bell. I turned around. The bell at plot 47 was completely still, rusted, frozen, but I heard it again. A single, clear tone, like someone had tapped the bell with a fingernail. I approached the grave slowly. The bell didn't move. The cable didn't shift. Everything was still, but the sound continued. Regular intervals, every few seconds, tap, tap, tap. Like someone ringing a bell with very little strength. Like someone who'd been ringing for a very long time and had almost no energy left. I reached out and touched the bell. It was cold, solid, definitely not moving. But I felt vibration, faint, coming up through the cable from below. I pulled my hand back. The tapping continued, 12 times, then stopped. I left the cemetery, drove home, tried to convince myself it was wind, or thermal expansion, or some natural explanation. But the next day, I found another missed call on my phone. Same number, same timestamp format, same 0 second duration. This time, the call had come at 3:47 a.m. While I was sleeping, I researched the original phone system installation in the area. Phones came to this region in 1897, 14 years after Elizabeth Marsh was buried. The phone line infrastructure was removed in 1978 when the cemetery was abandoned. There was no phone line at Plot 47. Never had been, but something was calling. I went back to Riverside Cemetery with audio recording equipment, set up a microphone near the bell, left it running overnight. The next morning, I reviewed the recording for most of the night. Nothing, just wind and distant traffic. Then at 3:47 a.m., sounds. Not the bell, not ringing, scratching. The recording captured it clearly. The sound of something scraping against wood, then against metal, then against wood again, rhythmic, desperate, and underneath the scratching, something else. Breathing, shallow, labored, the sound of someone trying to breathe in a very small space. The sounds continued for exactly 3 hours, then stopped, the same duration as the bell ringing in 1883. I contacted the cemetery board, explained what I'd found, recommended exhumation of Plot 47 for historical documentation purposes. They refused. Too expensive. No living relatives to provide permission. The grave was over a century old. Nothing to be gained. I tried to explain about the recordings, about the phone calls, about the bell. They asked if I was feeling well, suggested I take a break from the project. I haven't been back to Riverside Cemetery, but the phone calls continue. Every few weeks, same number, same 0-second duration, always at 3:47 a.m. or 3:47 p.m. I don't answer anymore, but I listen to the recordings. The scratching sounds continue. The breathing continues, shallow and desperate. Someone trying to signal, someone still pulling a string connected to a bell that doesn't ring anymore. Someone who's been trying to signal for 140 years. I researched Elizabeth Marsh's medical records, found a note from the attending physician. Patient exhibited cataleptic episodes during illness. Family concerned about premature burial, requested delayed interment and safety precautions. Catalepsy, a condition that mimics death. Rigid muscles, suspended animation. People with catalepsy were sometimes buried alive before modern medical diagnostics. Elizabeth Marsh had cataleptic episodes, and she was buried with a bell system, and 1 month after burial, the bell rang 127 times. J. Morrison, the caretaker, didn't dig her up. He counted the rings and documented them, then he did nothing, because by the time he investigated at dawn, the ringing had stopped, and once it stops, what's the point of digging? Either she's dead, or she died waiting to be rescued. Either way, the bell is silent. Except it's not silent anymore. Not for me. Last night, the phone rang while I was awake. 3:47 p.m. I stared at the screen, watched it ring, didn't answer. After it went to voicemail, I checked the message. There was no voice, just sound. 3 hours of scratching and breathing, compressed into a 30-second voicemail, and at the end, barely audible, a whisper. 127. The number of times she rang the bell, the number of times she tried to signal, the number of times someone should have come, should have dug her up, should have saved her, but nobody came. And now, 140 years later, she's still trying, still scratching, still breathing in that small dark space, still calling the only number she knows. Plot 47. I'm leaving the cemetery history field, taking a job in municipal archives, documents, records, things that are definitely dead, and definitely not calling anyone. But I know the calls will continue. Every few weeks, 3:47 a.m. or p.m., 127 rings that nobody answered, 140 years of waiting, and a voicemail that never ends. Someone else can document Riverside Cemetery. Someone else can preserve Plot 47. Someone else can answer the phone. I'm done, but the bell isn't. The bell never stopped. It just changed frequencies, and it's still ringing, still waiting, still hoping someone will finally answer. I found a photograph of myself at a funeral I'll direct next month. My name is Kim, and I've been a funeral director for 9 years. I work at Harrington Funeral Home, a family owned business that's been serving this community since 1923. I handle arrangements, conduct services, manage viewings. It's demanding work, but I find it meaningful. You're helping people through the worst day of their lives. Last August, I was cataloging items from an estate sale. Sometimes families donate funeral related materials to us: old guest books, photographs, memorial cards. We keep them in our historical archive. It helps with genealogy research and adds to the community record. This particular donation came from the Brennan estate. The last surviving family member had passed, and the executor was clearing out the house. Among the items was a box of glass plate photographs from the 1920s. Glass plate photography was common then. The images are remarkably clear, much sharper than early paper prints. We have dozens of them in our archive. Funeral services, family portraits, memorial gatherings. I was examining the plates one by one, documenting them, when I found the photograph that changed everything. It showed a funeral service, outdoor burial, probably 1923 or 24 based on the clothing and the cars in the background. There were about 30 mourners gathered around an open grave. A casket was visible, suspended over the grave on canvas straps. Standard funeral photograph for that era. Families often documented burials. It was their way of marking the moment, of having a record. But this photograph was different. In the background, standing slightly apart from the main group of mourners, was a woman in modern clothing. Black dress suit, contemporary style, short hair, and she was wearing a lanyard with an ID badge. She was me, not someone who looked like me. Me, my face, my exact features, my posture, even the dress suit looked like one I own. I checked the photograph again, used a magnifying glass. The resolution on glass plates is extraordinary. I could see details, the weave of the fabric, the way my hair fell, the expression on my face. It was definitely me. Standing at a funeral service in 1923, 100 years before I was born, I felt cold. Set the photograph down, stared at it for a long time. There had to be an explanation. Maybe a relative, someone who looked like me. Maybe the photograph had been tampered with somehow. But glass plates don't lie. The image was continuous, undisturbed, no evidence of manipulation or double exposure. I scanned the photograph at high resolution, examined every detail. The woman in the background was standing near a tree, partially obscured by mourners, but she was clearly visible, and she was clearly me. I looked at the other details in the photograph: the casket, the gravesite, the mourners. Tried to find identifying information. On the casket, barely visible, was a nameplate. I enhanced the image. The name was partially obscured, but I could make out Ert Chambers, Robert Chambers, or Albert Chambers, or Herbert Chambers. I checked our historical records, found 3 Chambers burials in 1923. Robert Chambers, buried March 7th. Albert Chambers, buried June 15th. Herbert Chambers, buried October 23rd. I compared the photograph to burial records, matched it to Robert Chambers, March 7th, 1923. Outdoor service at Riverside Cemetery. Everything matched. The season, the location, the style of service. And I was there, in the photograph, standing in the background. I researched my family history, looking for any connection to the Chambers family. Any reason I might have relatives who looked exactly like me. Nothing, no connection. My family wasn't even in this area in 1923. They were in Korea. Didn't immigrate until 1978. I couldn't be in that photograph. It was impossible, but I was. I started having dreams. The same dream every night. I'm standing at a funeral service. Outdoor burial, 1920s. I'm wearing my black suit, my ID badge. I'm watching mourners I don't know grieve for someone I've never met, and I'm aware that I don't belong there, that I'm displaced somehow. Wrong era, wrong century. But I can't leave. I'm stuck there, watching, waiting for something. In the dream, one of the mourners always turns to look at me. An older woman in black. She stares at me with recognition, like she knows me, like she's been expecting me. Then I wake up. Last week, I received a call from a family requesting funeral services. Their father had passed away. Natural causes. Cremation followed by burial. Standard arrangements. The deceased's name was Peter Chambers, age 87. Chambers, the same surname. I met with the family. They showed me photographs of Peter. He was the grandson of Robert Chambers, the man buried in 1923, the man in the glass plate photograph. We'd like to bury him at Riverside Cemetery, the daughter said, in the family plot, next to his grandfather. Riverside Cemetery, the same location as the photograph. I felt my throat tighten. When would you like to schedule the service? Next month, she said. October 20th, Saturday. Outdoor service if weather permits. October 20th, next month. I checked the burial records. The family plot at Riverside had space. The arrangements were straightforward. Everything was normal, except I knew I'd been to this funeral before. 100 years ago, standing in the background, watching, I've been preparing for October 20th, coordinating with the cemetery, arranging the service, ordering flowers, everything routine. But I keep thinking about the photograph, about the woman standing in the background, about the expression on my face. I look calm in the photograph. Professional, like I'm supposed to be there, like I've accepted whatever's happening. Yesterday, I went to Riverside Cemetery, walked through the Chambers family plot, found Robert Chambers's grave. 1923. The stone was weathered but intact. I stood in the spot where I'd been standing in the photograph, near the tree, slightly apart from where the mourners would gather. It felt familiar, like I'd stood there before, like I'd stood there 100 years ago, waiting for this moment. I took a photograph with my phone, same angle as the glass plate, same position. When I looked at the image, I saw myself standing there. Modern clothing, ID badge, same expression as in the 1923 photograph. Calm, professional, accepting. I'm directing Peter Chambers's funeral in 3 days. October 20th, Saturday, outdoor service at Riverside Cemetery. The weather forecast is clear, mild temperatures, no rain, perfect funeral weather. I've prepared everything, the service order, the burial coordination. The family has approved all the arrangements. And I keep looking at the glass plate photograph, at myself, standing in the background of Robert Chambers's funeral in 1923. I know what's going to happen. I know I'll stand in that same spot on Saturday. I'll watch the service. I'll fulfill whatever moment was captured a century ago. But I don't know why. I don't know how I was in a photograph taken 100 years before I was born. I don't know what happens after the funeral, after I become the woman in the photograph. Do I stay there? Do I loop back? Do I exist in both times simultaneously? The woman in the 1923 photograph looks like she knows, like she understands something I don't yet. And in 3 days, I'll be her. I'll stand in that spot. I'll watch that funeral. I'll complete the photograph, and maybe then I'll understand. Or maybe I'll just take my place in a loop that's been running for 100 years. A funeral director who attended a funeral before she was born, waiting to direct a funeral she's already attended, trapped in a moment that exists in 2 centuries at once. I've left instructions with my assistant, in case something happens, in case I don't come back from the Chambers funeral, in case I step into that photograph and can't step out. She thinks I'm joking. She laughed when I told her, but I left the glass plate photograph on my desk. With a note, if I don't return, this is where I'll be. October 20th, 1923, Riverside Cemetery, standing by the tree. 3 days from now, I'll find out if time is a circle or a line, if I'm trapped or free, if the photograph captured me or created me, and somewhere in a box of glass plates, there's a second photograph, one I haven't found yet. October 20th, 2024. Peter Chambers's funeral, Riverside Cemetery. And in the background, standing by the tree, wearing modern clothes and an ID badge, is a woman. She looks calm, professional, like she knows exactly where she is and why she's there, like she's been there before, like she's been there forever. And when I stand in that spot on Saturday, when I take my place in the photograph, I'll become her. The woman who exists in every Chambers funeral, every generation, every century, standing by the tree, waiting, always waiting for the next funeral I've already attended, the next moment I've already lived, the next photograph that's already been taken. 3 days, then I'll know, or I'll always be wondering, standing in two times at once, forever caught between the funeral I'm directing and the funeral I attended a century ago, forever visible in photographs I haven't taken yet, forever present at services I haven't been born to conduct. The funeral director who transcends time, or the woman who's trapped in it. I'll know on Saturday, October 20th, the day I become the photograph, the day the photograph becomes me.